You're not eating wrong because you lack discipline. You're eating wrong because everything you were taught was invented by a cereal company, a government committee, or someone who needed to sell something. Here are 101 reasons why. 1. You've been guilt-tripped into choking down morning food you don't want because skipping breakfast supposedly derails your entire metabolism and transforms your body into a fat-storing disaster zone before 9 in the morning. Here's the part they didn't teach you in school. That rule was a slogan before it was ever a belief. It was engineered in the late 19th century by cereal manufacturers who had an enormous financial incentive to make breakfast feel like a moral obligation. A 1944 Grape Nuts advertising campaign put the phrase, "Breakfast is the most important meal of the day," front and center. Not a medical journal, not a nutrition board, a cereal advertisement. Modern clinical research, including multiple randomized controlled trials, shows that for healthy adults, skipping breakfast has no meaningful negative effect on metabolic rate, cognitive function, or weight management. Intermittent fasting protocols, which routinely eliminate breakfast entirely, produce equivalent or superior weight outcomes compared to the traditional three-meal framework. You've been running your entire morning around a rule written by someone trying to move product. The only thing breakfast is the most important meal of the day for is the quarterly earnings report of a cereal conglomerate. 2. The moment you feel a scratch in your throat, someone in your life recites it with the confidence of a licensed physician. Feed a cold, starve a fever. You've adjusted your caloric intake based on a rhyme with no author, no source, and zero clinical backing, handed down through generations like it was carved into stone somewhere important. It wasn't. The phrase appears in a 1574 dictionary of English proverbs, meaning its origins are entirely pre-scientific and rooted in folk belief, not medicine. Here's what your immune system actually needs when it's fighting an internal war. Energy. Fever dramatically elevates your basal metabolic rate, body temperature rising by just 1 degree. Celsius increases metabolic demand by roughly 7%. Your body is burning more during a fever, not less. Research published in peer-reviewed immunology journals confirms that glucose availability is critical for producing T cells and cytokines, the core soldiers of your immune response. A 2002 study in clinical infectious diseases found no physiological basis for food restriction during fever and noted that malnutrition actively suppresses immune function. Starving a fever is like unplugging a factory during its busiest production run because you read a medieval bumper sticker. Your immune system needed fuel. You handed it a policy memo. 3. You've been counting ounces, guilt-drinking water you don't want, and possibly downloading hydration reminder apps because someone told you 8 glasses a day is the biological law of human survival. The number feels scientific. It has the specificity of something that was measured in a laboratory by people in white coats. It wasn't. The original source is a 1945 U.S. Food and Nutrition Board recommendation stating that adults need roughly 2.5 liters of water daily. But the very next sentence clarified that most of that quantity is contained in prepared foods. That sentence disappeared. The rule stayed. A comprehensive review published in the American Journal of Physiology by Dr. Heinz Valton in 2002 found no scientific evidence supporting the 8 glasses rule and concluded the recommendation was likely based on misinterpretation. Water content in common foods is substantial. Cucumber is 96% water, strawberries are 91%, and even cooked chicken breast is approximately 65% water. Individual needs vary dramatically based on body mass, temperature, activity, and kidney function. Your body has a built-in gauge. It's called thirst. You were born with it. Use it. 4. For decades you avoided avocados like they were radioactive and celebrated the fat-free label on a cookie as a moral victory because fat in food meant fat on your body. Simple equation. Wrong in almost every direction. Dietary fat and body fat are not the same substance, running the same program. Fat in food is a macronutrient. Body fat is a storage response to excess caloric energy. The equation you memorized was marketing dressed as physiology. The fat phobia era was substantially accelerated by physiologist Ansel Keys and his 1977 countries study, which has since been heavily criticized for cherry-picking data from countries that supported a fat disease link while quietly excluding countries that contradicted it. When food manufacturers reformulated products to remove fat in the 1980s and 90s, they replaced it with refined sugars and starches to maintain palatability, products that elevated insulin response and contributed to increased fat storage. The U.S. obesity rate rose steadily throughout the low-fat diet era, suggesting the removal of fat from the diet did not produce the anticipated benefits. Dietary fats play essential roles in hormone production, fat-soluble vitamin absorption, and cellular membrane integrity. You spent 30 years afraid of the ingredient your brain is literally made of. The villain was never the avocado. 5. Every parent knows it. Every grandparent enforces it, and the birthday party becomes a controlled experiment in collective anxiety. Sugar turns children feral. It's not even considered a debate anymore. It's parenting gospel, delivered with the certainty of observed fact, repeated across enough generations that questioning it feels like questioning gravity. The problem is that it is physiologically false, and the clinical evidence has been confirming that for decades. A landmark 1995 meta-analysis published in the Journal of the American Medical Association reviewed 23 controlled trials involving sugar and child behavior and found no evidence that sugar consumption caused increased hyperactivity or behavioral changes in children. The more revealing finding came from double-blind studies, where parents were falsely told their child had consumed sugar when they had actually received a placebo. Those parents rated their children as significantly more hyperactive anyway, demonstrating that the effect lives entirely in the adult observer's expectation, not in the child's bloodstream. The hyperactivity at birthday parties is more accurately explained by environmental excitement, social stimulation, disrupted routine, and the total absence of a bedtime. You've been blaming the cupcake for what the bouncy castle was doing all along. The sugar didn't wire your kid. The 15 screaming friends did that. 6. Your mother made you wear a hat in winter because 40%, 70%, even 90% of your body heat escapes through your bare head. The percentage escalating with the urgency of the relative delivering the warning. The head, it was implied, is a thermal chimney through which your warmth pours out into the uncaring winter sky if left uncovered. Your head loses heat in proportion to its surface area, which is roughly 10% of your total body surface. It is not a chimney. It is just a head. The origin of this myth is widely traced to a 1970 U.S. Army field manual that reported significant heat loss through the head. But the study involved subjects wearing fully insulated Arctic suits with their heads left uncovered, meaning the head was the only exposed area and therefore the dominant loss point by experimental design, not by biology. Heat loss from any body surface is determined by how much of that surface is exposed to cold. A 2008 study published in the British Medical Journal directly tested this myth and found no evidence that the head loses a disproportionate amount of heat compared to other body regions of equivalent surface area. Your head is 10% of your body, losing 10% of your heat. That's just math. 7. You've been hissed at across dinner tables, lectured by teachers, and subjected to prolonged, disappointed looks from elders who were absolutely certain that your knuckle-cracking habit was writing a medical diagnosis in real time. Every pop, every deliberate flex of the finger joints was supposedly accelerating your inevitable arthritis. There is no causal link between knuckle cracking and arthritis. The sound is gas, not damage. The popping is generated by the rapid formation and collapse of gas bubbles, primarily carbon dioxide and nitrogen, within the synovial fluid of the joint, a process called cavitation. The bubbles form, they collapse, they make a sound. That's the entirety of the event. Dr. Donald Unger, in what remains one of the more committed pieces of anecdotal research in medical history, cracked the knuckles on one hand exclusively for 60 years, while leaving the other hand alone. He found no difference in arthritis incidence between the two hands and received an Ig Nobel Prize for his dedication. A clinical study published in Arthritis and Rheumatism in 1990 examined 300 patients and found no correlation between habitual knuckle cracking and osteoarthritis. The noise you're making is a gas bubble, not your future mobility collapsing. Crack away, though perhaps not at the dinner table. 8. You've been told since childhood that carrots are basically corrective lenses in vegetable form. Eat enough of them, and you'll be reading license plates from a city block away, finding things in dark rooms, developing some kind of vegetable-sponsored night vision that your optometrist never mentioned as an option. Carrots will not improve functional eyesight in any person who isn't already suffering from severe vitamin A deficiency. They are a vegetable, not an optical upgrade. This myth was deliberately engineered during World War II by the British Royal Air Force and the Ministry of Food. When the RAF developed airborne radar technology that dramatically improved pilots' ability to intercept German bombers at night, they needed to conceal the technology's existence. They planted stories crediting pilots' accuracy to carrot-heavy diets. Vitamin A, found in carrots as beta-carotene, is essential for producing rhodopsin, which enables low-light vision, and severe deficiency does cause night blindness, which vitamin A corrects. But in populations with adequate vitamin A intake, which includes virtually everyone in developed nations with access to varied food, consuming additional beta-carotene provides zero improvement in visual acuity. The most effective thing a carrot ever did for human vision was help the British military hide radar technology from the Germans. You've been honoring wartime propaganda at the dinner table for 80 years. 9. Every home cook, every grilling enthusiast, every cooking show host has delivered the instruction with total authority. Sear the meat first to lock in the juices. It sounds like technique. It sounds like culinary science passed down from professional kitchens to your backyard. Searing does not seal anything. Meat has no seal. The juices leave at exactly the same rate whether you sear first or not. The searing seals juices theory was popularized by German chemist Justus von Liebig in the 19th century, who proposed, without rigorous experimental evidence, that high heat caused a physical crust to form that prevented moisture loss. Food scientist Harold McGee systematically dismantled this claim in his landmark book On Food and Cooking, demonstrating through controlled comparison that seared cuts lose roughly the same percentage of moisture as unseared cuts. Experiments conducted by culinary scientists confirmed that seared and unseared steaks of identical weight, cooked to identical internal temperature, show no statistically meaningful difference in moisture retention. The reason seared meat tastes dramatically better is the Maillard reaction, a chemical process between amino acids and reducing sugars at high heat that produces hundreds of new flavor compounds. Searing improves flavor. It does not create a moisture barrier. A 19th century chemist invented food mythology, and culinary culture has been faithfully preserving his mistake ever since. 10. The microwave sits in 90% of kitchens and gets treated like a necessary evil. Fast and convenient, yes, but silently murdering every vitamin in whatever you put inside it. You've probably apologized for using one. Someone at some point implied that microwaved food was nutritionally compromised, and the idea lodged itself without ever being examined. Microwaving is among the most nutrient-preserving cooking methods available. The factors that destroy nutrients are heat intensity and duration of exposure. Microwaves use dramatically less of both compared to conventional methods. Water-soluble vitamins like B vitamins and vitamin C are the most vulnerable to heat and water exposure, and they degrade proportionally to how long they're cooked and how much water they're cooked in. A study published in the Journal of the Science of Food and Agriculture found that broccoli cooked in water on a stovetop lost up to 97% of certain antioxidants, while microwaved broccoli with minimal water retained the majority of the same compounds. The electromagnetic radiation used in microwave ovens is non-ionizing. It agitates water molecules to generate heat and cannot alter the molecular structure of vitamins differently from conventional heat. You've been morally opposed to the most nutritionally conservative cooking appliance in your kitchen while boiling your vegetables into gray, vitamin-depleted water on the stove like it's a wellness practice. 11. Cooking kills nutrients, and therefore raw is more nutritious, more alive, more aligned with how food was meant to be consumed. The raw food philosophy has a certain logic to it: untouched, unprocessed, uncompromised. The problem is that bioavailability, how much of a nutrient your body can actually absorb, changes dramatically with cooking, and for several key vegetables, cooking makes them significantly more nutritious, not less. The lycopene in tomatoes becomes substantially more bioavailable after cooking. Studies have found that cooked tomato products deliver up to 4 times more absorbable lycopene than raw tomatoes. Beta-carotene in carrots becomes significantly more bioavailable after heat exposure. A 2002 study found that cooked carrots delivered substantially higher plasma beta-carotene levels in test subjects than raw carrots delivered. Spinach contains oxalic acid, which in its raw form binds to calcium and iron and prevents their absorption. Cooking breaks down oxalic acid, freeing those minerals for actual use. Cooking also breaks down plant cell walls, physically releasing nutrients that would otherwise pass through the digestive system intact and unabsorbed. Raw vegetables can be excellent food. They can also be a locked safe full of nutrients your body will never access. Cooking is not always destruction. Sometimes it's the key. Your salad isn't inherently superior to the roasted version. It's just cold. 12. The moment you feel a scratch in your throat, the vitamin C tablets emerge. Megadosing ascorbic acid is the accepted first response to any hint of illness. Handed down through generations with the confidence of established medicine, reinforced by health food stores with entire shelves dedicated to the proposition. Vitamin C does not prevent colds in the general population and does not meaningfully shorten their duration for most people. The connection was popularized primarily by Nobel laureate Linus Pauling, who in his 1970 book advocated megadoses of up to 18 grams per day, a position held with passionate conviction that was not well supported by the clinical trials his work inspired. A comprehensive Cochrane review covering 29 clinical trials with over 11,000 participants found that regular vitamin C supplementation did not reduce the incidence of colds in the general population. The same review found a modest reduction in cold duration, approximately 8% shorter for adults, an effect so small it is generally considered clinically insignificant. The review did find a meaningful preventive effect in people under acute physical stress, like marathon runners in extreme cold, a subgroup that does not include the average person reaching for tablets at the first sniffle. The tablet isn't hurting you. It's mostly expensive reassurance with a faint citrus flavor. 13. Swimming on a full stomach means cramps, and cramps mean drowning, and therefore every sandwich requires a 60-minute holding period before you're allowed back in the water. This rule was iron law at every public pool of the 20th century, delivered by lifeguards and parents with the gravity of a genuine safety protocol. There is no documented case of anyone drowning due to post-meal cramps from recreational swimming, and the physiological premise is implausible. The concern is theoretically rooted in the idea that digestion diverts blood flow to the gastrointestinal tract, reducing circulation available to working muscles and potentially causing cramping. While blood flow is redirected toward the digestive system after eating, the human cardiovascular system is entirely capable of supporting simultaneous digestive and muscular demands during moderate intensity activity. The American Red Cross has stated, there is no evidence that swimming after eating poses a significant drowning risk for recreational swimmers. Elite athletes, including competitive swimmers and endurance athletes, routinely eat during and between training efforts without the catastrophic cramping. This myth predicts, in fact, fueling during exercise is standard sports nutrition practice. Millions of summer afternoons were spent sitting on pool edges watching other people swim in honor of a rule that has never been validated by a single drowning report. The sandwich required no cooling off period. 14. You reach for the brown loaf with the quiet confidence of someone making a responsible decision. Brown equals whole grain, equals fiber, equals health. The color communicates virtue so effectively that the question of what's actually inside the bread becomes almost unnecessary. Color tells you almost nothing about nutritional content. Most commercial brown bread is white bread with added molasses or caramel coloring. You are buying the visual language of health, not the substance of it. The term whole grain has a specific legal definition in most countries. The bread must be made with the entire grain kernel, including the bran and germ. The term brown bread has no such regulatory definition and can legally be applied to any bread that is brown in color, regardless of how it was produced. A widely documented practice among commercial bread manufacturers is the addition of molasses, caramel coloring, or brown sugar to white flour doughs to produce the appearance of whole grain bread without altering the base ingredient. Genuine whole grain bread contains significantly more fiber, B vitamins, iron, and magnesium than refined white bread, but the only way to verify it is to check the ingredients list for whole wheat flour as the first listed ingredient, not to judge the color of the loaf. You've been buying a tan and calling it a lifestyle. 15. You've heard it delivered as settled neuroscience. Every drink you take is leaving a small body count among your neurons. The brain is being depleted, cell by cell, pint by pint, with each drink moving you incrementally towards some kind of accelerated cognitive decline that a sober lifestyle would have spared you. Moderate alcohol consumption does not kill neurons. It disrupts their function temporarily, and in cases of severe chronic alcoholism can damage the connections between cells. But casual drinking is not conducting a massacre in your skull. Post-mortem neurological studies have directly contradicted the neuron death claim. Research conducted by Greta Jensen and colleagues, published in 1993, compared the brains of moderate drinkers and non-drinkers and found no statistically significant difference in neuron count in the cerebral cortex. What alcohol does acutely is interfere with neurotransmitter signaling, particularly GABA and glutamate systems, which is why coordination, judgment, and memory are impaired while intoxicated. These effects are largely reversible. Severe chronic alcoholism can cause Wernicke-Korsakoff syndrome, a form of brain damage resulting primarily from thiamine deficiency rather than from alcohol directly destroying neurons. You are not neurosurgically bankrupt after a Friday night. The neurons are mostly fine, just briefly offline. The real damage is more complicated, less dramatic, and takes significantly more than a social drink to accumulate. 16. Go outside with wet hair, and you'll catch a cold. Stay in the cold long enough, and you'll be sick by morning. The connection between temperature and illness is so deeply embedded, it has been weaponized by parents for centuries. Delivered with the authority of something that has been personally observed too many times to question. Cold temperatures do not cause colds. Viruses cause colds. You cannot catch an illness from an ambient temperature. The common cold is caused primarily by rhinoviruses, of which there are over 100 strains, and transmission occurs through contact with infected individuals. Respiratory droplets or surface contact, not through exposure to cold air. A series of experiments conducted by the Common Cold Research Unit in Salisbury, England, in the 1950s and 60s deliberately exposed volunteers to cold, damp conditions after inoculating some with rhinovirus. Cold exposure alone, without viral exposure, produced no increased incidence of illness. The reason colds are more prevalent in winter is likely behavioral. People spend more time indoors in close proximity to other people, facilitating viral transmission. Some research suggests rhinoviruses replicate slightly more efficiently at the cooler nasal temperatures that accompany cold weather exposure. But even this mechanism requires the virus to be present first. The cold outside cannot make you sick. Only the sick person inside can do that. 17. Sick? Orange juice. It's reflexive, the vitamin C, the fluid, the bright color that implies vitality. Juice is the universal prescription for illness, served in every hospital scene ever filmed, handed to every sniffling child by every well-meaning parent, purchased in bulk the moment a sore throat appears. It is not medicine. An 8-ounce glass of commercial orange juice contains approximately 21 grams of sugar, roughly the same as several spoonfuls of table sugar, with no fiber to slow its absorption, resulting in a rapid blood glucose spike. Research in nutrition immunology suggests that excessive simple sugar consumption acutely suppresses certain immune functions. A 1973 study published in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition found that white blood cell activity was reduced for several hours following high sugar intake. The vitamin C content in a standard glass is real, but rapidly reaches the ceiling of what the body can absorb at once. Excess vitamin C is water-soluble and excreted in urine. Consuming more than the body can use provides no compounding therapeutic benefit. Hydration during illness is genuinely important, but water, broths, and electrolyte solutions are more effective hydration vehicles without the glycemic load. You've been giving your struggling immune system a sugar spike and calling it treatment. Your immune system wanted water and rest. It got a breakfast beverage doing vitamin cosplay. 18. For decades, the egg yolk was treated like a cholesterol delivery device aimed directly at your arteries, and you responded accordingly, ordering egg white omelets, throwing out the yolk, purchasing cartoned egg whites in bulk, and feeling genuinely virtuous about the whole arrangement. For the overwhelming majority of people, dietary cholesterol from eggs has minimal impact on cardiovascular disease risk, and the science that condemned the egg has been substantially revised. The diet heart hypothesis, linking dietary cholesterol to blood cholesterol to heart disease, became dominant in the 1960s and 70s, heavily influenced by work that has since been criticized for significant methodological weaknesses. The liver produces approximately 75 to 80% of the body's total cholesterol through endogenous synthesis, and when dietary cholesterol intake increases, the liver compensates by reducing its own production. A feedback mechanism called cholesterol homeostasis that limits the net impact of egg consumption in most people. A large Harvard School of Public Health study, following over 100,000 participants, found no significant association between eating up to 1 egg per day and heart disease risk in healthy individuals. You threw out the most nutritionally complete whole food in your refrigerator. Because of a dietary consensus, the scientific community has spent 30 years quietly walking back. The egg didn't cause the crisis. It got blamed for what ultra-processed food was doing, while that food kept its lawyers on retainer. 19. The sea salt aisle at the grocery store has become a monument to premium wellness. Flaked, coarse, infused, pink-tinged, arranged with the care of a specialty pharmacy. You pay 3 times the price because sea salt is natural, unprocessed, and clearly superior to the industrial white granules in the cheap shaker. Sea salt and table salt are chemically identical in every way that matters. Both are approximately 97 to 99% sodium chloride. The remaining trace minerals in sea salt, magnesium, potassium, calcium, are present in quantities so small they contribute nothing nutritionally meaningful to your diet. Table salt is typically iodized, fortified with iodine, because iodine deficiency was a serious public health problem before fortification programs eliminated it. Sea salt is rarely iodized, meaning those who switch entirely to sea salt for health reasons may paradoxically be reducing their iodine intake while spending significantly more per ounce. Premium Himalayan pink salt gets its color from trace iron oxide, which is rust, and the mineral content providing that color represents a fraction of a percent of the product with no therapeutic value. The sodium content per gram is essentially identical between all salt varieties, meaning cardiovascular and blood pressure risk profiles are the same. You are paying a luxury markup for trace amounts of minerals your body gets in meaningful doses from dozens of other foods you eat every single day. 20. Spicy food destroys your stomach lining and causes ulcers. Everyone who has ever winced through a hot meal has been told this, warned about it, or blamed it retroactively for a digestive complaint they experienced sometime in the vicinity of eating something with heat. Spicy food does not cause ulcers. A bacterial infection does, and the culprit wasn't identified until the 1980s, by which point the pepper had already been tried and convicted in the court of popular opinion. In 1984, Australian physician Barry Marshall drank a Petri dish containing Helicobacter pylori bacteria to prove it was the causative agent of peptic ulcers. He developed gastritis within days, treated himself with antibiotics, and was cured. He and his collaborator Robin Warren received the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine in 2005. H. pylori is responsible for approximately 90% of duodenal ulcers and 70 to 80% of gastric ulcers, with remaining cases primarily caused by long-term NSAID use, like ibuprofen and aspirin. Capsaicin has actually been shown in some studies to stimulate the stomach's protective mucus layer and may have mild gastroprotective properties. Spicy food can irritate an existing ulcer, but irritating an injury and causing an injury are two entirely different things. The chili pepper showed up to a crime scene. It did not commit the crime. 21. You feel virtuous adding honey to your tea instead of reaching for a zero-calorie sweetener, which you've been told is a chemical nightmare invented in a laboratory to give rats bladder cancer and rewire your relationship with sweetness until you can no longer function without manufactured intensity. The sweetener studies that terrified an entire generation used doses of saccharin equivalent to consuming hundreds of cans of diet soda daily, doses that caused physical irritation in rat bladder tissue through a rodent-specific mechanism that does not apply to human physiology. The International Agency for Research on Cancer reviewed aspartame and classified it as possibly carcinogenic to humans, placing it in the same category as aloe vera extract and pickled vegetables, a classification that does not mean it causes cancer at typical consumption levels. Honey, meanwhile, the natural and therefore virtuous alternative, is approximately 40% fructose and 30% glucose. The liver metabolizes fructose from honey through exactly the same pathways it uses for any other fructose. The botanical origin of the sugar molecule is irrelevant to its metabolic fate. Gram for gram, honey has a slightly higher caloric density than table sugar because it contains trace water. Your liver does not read the packaging. It reads the molecule, and the molecule is the same regardless of which flower the bee visited. 22. The organic label feels like a nutritional upgrade, cleaner, denser, more carefully produced, more aligned with what food is supposed to be before industry gets involved. You pay the premium because you believe you're investing in better nutrition, not just a different farming philosophy, and the two things feel inseparable when you're standing in the produce aisle. Organic refers to agricultural method, not nutritional outcome, and decades of research comparing organic and conventional produce show no consistent, meaningful difference in vitamin or mineral content. A comprehensive 2012 meta-analysis published in the Annals of Internal Medicine, conducted by Stanford University researchers, reviewed 223 studies comparing organic and conventional foods and found no strong evidence that organic foods are significantly more nutritious. A 2010 review by the UK's Food Standards Agency reached the same conclusion. Organic produce does contain lower levels of synthetic pesticide residues. This is the most substantiated benefit and has legitimate value, particularly for thin-skinned produce. But nutrient levels in any produce are far more affected by variety, time from harvest to consumption, soil mineral composition, and ripeness at harvest than by whether the farming method was certified organic. Organic farming may be better for the environment and genuinely produce lower pesticide residues. The argument that an organic apple has meaningfully more vitamin C than a conventional one is not supported by the science. You're paying for a method, not a measurement. 23. The detox industry has built a significant portion of its revenue on one quietly insulting premise: that your body is an accumulating toxic swamp that your organs are too incompetent to manage, and that their expensive laxative-adjacent liquid products are the intervention your liver has been waiting for. The word toxin in wellness marketing means nothing specific, because it never has to. Your liver is a highly sophisticated metabolic filter, capable of processing hundreds of compounds simultaneously, conjugating fat-soluble toxins into water-soluble forms for excretion through urine or bile, operating continuously without requiring citrus-infused assistance. No peer-reviewed clinical study has identified a specific toxin removed by a commercial cleanse product that would not be removed by normal organ function. The wellness industry's use of the word toxin is deliberately vague and never accompanied by chemical specificity, because the moment you name the specific molecule you're removing, someone with a basic chemistry education can ask where the evidence is. A 2015 systematic review in the Journal of Human Nutrition and Dietetics examined published evidence for commercial detox diets and found no convincing evidence that they remove toxins or improve health. Many popular cleanse products contain ingredients with laxative properties, Senna, magnesium citrate, meaning the primary effect is gastrointestinal transit acceleration, which is not detoxification. You paid premium prices for laxative water to do the job your evolutionary organ development handles every second of every day at zero cost. 24. The MSG warning label on Chinese restaurant menus became a fixture of food culture, suggesting that monosodium glutamate was a neurological hazard lurking in takeout containers, producing headaches and chest tightening, and a vague collection of symptoms that became known as Chinese restaurant syndrome, with enough cultural momentum to survive decades of contradicting evidence. MSG is one of the most thoroughly studied food additives in history, and the evidence for Chinese restaurant syndrome as a real, reproducible, MSG-specific phenomenon has essentially collapsed under controlled testing. The term entered medical literature in 1968 via a letter to the New England Journal of Medicine from one physician describing personal symptoms he attributed to MSG. Not a clinical study, not a controlled trial, a personal letter that generated a cultural panic. Multiple double-blind, controlled studies attempting to reproduce MSG sensitivity found that subjects who believed themselves sensitive could not consistently identify MSG-containing food versus placebo at rates better than chance when conditions were properly blinded. Monosodium glutamate is the sodium salt of glutamic acid, an amino acid occurring naturally in enormous quantities in Parmesan cheese, tomatoes, soy sauce, seaweed, and mushrooms, all eaten globally without concern. The FDA classifies it as generally recognized as safe. You have been avoiding a compound your Parmesan contains in higher concentrations than most Chinese takeout, based on a letter written by one man who didn't enjoy his dinner. 25. The post-workout protein window. Gym culture treats it with more urgency than a medical emergency. If you don't get protein within 30 minutes of your last rep, your muscles will apparently enter a self-destruct sequence that no subsequent meal can reverse, leaving you with less muscle than when you started, and a supplement company's nightmare scenario playing out in real time. The anabolic window is real, but it is dramatically wider than the supplement industry wants you to believe. A comprehensive 2013 meta-analysis published in the Journal of the International Society of Sports Nutrition, reviewing 43 studies, found that the timing of protein intake around a workout was far less important than total daily protein consumption. The window for elevated muscle protein synthesis remains open for several hours, post-exercise, not 30 minutes. Research comparing subjects who consumed protein immediately after training versus several hours later while controlling for total daily intake, found no significant difference in hypertrophic outcomes over multi-week training periods. The urgency of the post-workout window is further reduced when you've consumed protein in a pre-workout meal, as amino acid availability from that meal continues circulating for hours during and after exercise. The supplement industry invented a countdown clock and sold you the alarm. Your muscles are not on a self-destruct timer. They're perfectly content to wait while you shower. 26. The gluten-free shelf has become the health aisle, populated by people who couldn't define gluten with a $10 reward at stake, but who are absolutely certain that avoiding it will make them feel lighter, cleaner, and more responsible about their eating. For the roughly 1% of the population with celiac disease, gluten-free is a medical necessity. For the small percentage with confirmed non-celiac gluten sensitivity, it may provide genuine relief. For everyone else, it is an expensive belief system that the food industry has very profitably accommodated. A 2017 study published in the British Medical Journal found that long-term gluten-free diets in people without celiac disease were associated with a modestly increased risk of cardiovascular disease, likely because avoiding whole grains eliminated important sources of dietary fiber. Many commercial gluten-free products replace wheat flour with refined starches, rice flour, tapioca, potato starch, that have higher glycemic indices and lower fiber content than the products they replace. The perceived improvement in well-being that many self-diagnosed gluten avoiders report is likely attributable to the incidental reduction of ultra-processed foods that happen to contain gluten, rather than to gluten elimination specifically. You paid extra for a product that replaced one refined carbohydrate with another to avoid a protein you have no clinical reason to avoid because someone on a podcast felt bloated after pasta. Gluten didn't cause the bloating. A large bowl of white flour pasta usually does that on its own. 27. The kitchen closes at 7 p.m., maybe 8 if you're living dangerously. Eating after dark is metabolically irresponsible, and your body, which apparently operates on a strict schedule aligned with sunset, will warehouse those calories directly into fat while you sleep, because nighttime calories are fundamentally different from daytime calories in ways nobody can quite explain mechanistically, but everyone seems confident about. Your metabolism does not have a shift change. A calorie consumed at 9 p.m. is processed by the same biological machinery that handles a calorie consumed at noon. Basal metabolic rate, the energy your body burns to sustain basic function at rest, continues operating during sleep, using approximately 80 to 100 calories per hour for respiration, circulation, cellular repair, and thermoregulation. Multiple controlled feeding studies that equalized total caloric intake, while varying meal timing found no significant difference in weight change outcomes between daytime and nighttime eaters. Circadian rhythm research does suggest that metabolic efficiency for glucose processing is somewhat higher earlier in the day, but the magnitude of this effect at normal intake levels is small and does not translate to meaningful fat storage from modest evening eating. The real mechanism behind the association is behavioral. Late-night eating correlates strongly with calorie-dense snack foods consumed mindlessly in front of screens. That's a decision problem. Your body doesn't install a fat conversion mode at sunset. It just stops being supervised. 28. The superfood label has elevated goji berries to near pharmaceutical status, made kale a personality trait, and convinced people that a bowl of something expensive and exotic is performing nutritional work that an ordinary blueberry only dreams about. Superfood has no scientific or regulatory definition anywhere on Earth. It is a marketing category invented to justify premium pricing on ordinary fruits and vegetables that happen to be difficult to source or sufficiently unfamiliar to command a story. The European Union banned the term on food packaging in 2007 unless accompanied by a specific, authorized health claim backed by clinical evidence, a standard virtually no product could meet. No equivalent regulation exists in the United States, making the term legally meaningless. Blueberries, spinach, lentils, oats, and sardines consistently rank among the most nutritionally dense foods in clinical research. None are typically marketed as superfoods because they are inexpensive and widely available, which suggests the category has more to do with pricing strategy than nutritional science. No single food has been demonstrated in controlled clinical trials to prevent disease, extend lifespan, or enhance health outcomes in isolation. The consistent finding of nutritional epidemiology is that dietary patterns, not individual foods, determine health outcomes. A blueberry and a goji berry are both small, antioxidant-rich fruits. One costs $4 a pound in season. The other has a story about Himalayan monks and costs $22 for a small bag. The nutrients don't know which one came with a legend. 29. High fructose corn syrup became the dietary villain of the 2000s. The corporate Frankensweetener invented to make America obese, while regular sugar sat innocently nearby. Practically a health food by comparison, blameless and natural and entirely above suspicion in the public imagination. High fructose corn syrup and table sugar are chemically nearly identical, and the moral distinction you've drawn between them is not supported by biochemistry. Table sugar, sucrose, is a disaccharide composed of exactly 50% fructose and 50% glucose, bonded together. During digestion, the enzyme sucrase cleaves this bond, and both monosaccharides enter the bloodstream. The most common form of high fructose corn syrup used in beverages is approximately 55% fructose and 45% glucose. The compositional difference is 5 percentage points, a difference so small it is metabolically indistinguishable in practice for the vast majority of research applications. Both sweeteners are metabolized through identical pathways. Glucose enters glycolysis directly, while fructose is processed primarily in the liver. The documented harms associated with high intake, increased visceral fat, elevated triglycerides, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, are equally attributable to high sucrose intake, as multiple controlled feeding studies have demonstrated. You sentenced one ingredient to cultural exile while hosting its molecular twin for dinner every night. The problem is the dose of sugar. The specific passport the sugar arrives with is irrelevant. 30. The low-fat label still triggers a reflexive sense of responsible decision-making. Lower fat means lower calories, and lower calories means less weight gain. The arithmetic seems airtight, the logic seems unimpeachable, and the food industry spent several decades and enormous marketing budgets making sure you never questioned the equation long enough to notice what they put in to replace what they took out. Removing fat from food without destroying palatability requires adding something, almost universally sugar and refined carbohydrates. Fat provides 9 calories per gram, while carbohydrates provide 4, so replacing fat with carbohydrates does reduce caloric density on a per gram basis. The problem is that the quantity of added sugar typically required to make a low-fat product taste like food more than compensates for that arithmetic advantage. Low-fat products also tend to have lower satiety value than their full-fat counterparts, because fat slows gastric emptying and triggers satiety hormones including cholecystokinin and peptide YY. A 1999 study at Pennsylvania State University found that subjects eating low-fat yogurt consumed significantly more total calories at subsequent meals than subjects who ate full-fat yogurt, because the low-fat version failed to suppress appetite equivalently. The U.S. obesity rate approximately doubled between 1980 and 2000, the peak years of the low-fat movement. The food industry solved the problem of tasteless, fat-free food by injecting it with sugar, sold you the result as a health product, and watched the outcome. 31. Coffee was off limits for children and teenagers for decades because everyone knew it stopped you from reaching your full height. Parents enforced it. Pediatricians mentioned it casually enough that it became embedded in developmental common knowledge, without ever being examined as carefully as it deserved, given that an entire generation's relationship with a morning beverage was being shaped by it. There is no peer-reviewed evidence that caffeine or coffee consumption affects height, bone growth plates, or any growth-related biological process in humans at normal consumption levels. The origin of this myth is plausibly traced to early 20th century advertising campaigns by competing breakfast beverage companies that actively marketed against coffee's suitability for children as a way to position their own products favorably. Height is determined primarily by genetics, accounting for approximately 80% of variation, with the remaining variance attributed to nutrition, sleep, and general health during developmental years. Caffeine does not appear anywhere in this causal chain in the clinical literature. Some historical research associated caffeine with reduced bone calcium absorption, but the effect is extremely small. 1 cup of coffee was estimated to reduce calcium absorption by about 2 to 3 milligrams, and entirely compensable by adding a small amount of milk. Your height was written in your DNA before you took your first sip of anything. Coffee is not editing your chromosomes. The myth was built by someone trying to sell you a different morning beverage, and it outlasted the company that invented it by roughly a century. 32. You invoke it with the practiced confidence of someone citing actual physics. 5 seconds on the floor, and the food is retrievable. The countdown begins. The bacteria wait for their cue. You win through speed and decisiveness. Bacterial transfer is not governed by a countdown. It begins the moment contact is made, and it depends on the food's moisture content and the contamination level of the surface, not your reaction time or your commitment to a rule that someone invented to justify eating a dropped cookie. Research conducted by food scientist Donald Schaffner at Rutgers University, published in Applied and Environmental Microbiology in 2016, tested bacterial transfer from contaminated surfaces to food across time intervals ranging from less than 1 second to 300 seconds. The study found that bacterial transfer occurred at all time points, including those under 1 second. Transfer rates were influenced primarily by the moisture content of the food. Wet foods transferred significantly more bacteria than dry foods regardless of contact duration. Surface type also mattered considerably. Carpet transferred fewer bacteria than tile or stainless steel, meaning a dropped strawberry on tile was meaningfully more contaminated than a dropped pretzel on carpet, even if both were retrieved instantly. The study concluded that the 5-second rule is not supported by the data. The bacteria signed no agreement. They were on the food in the first millisecond, and they brought company. 33. Milk builds bones. Calcium builds bones. Dairy has calcium. Therefore, dairy builds bones. The syllogism feels airtight and has been reinforced by decades of industry-funded nutritional messaging, so pervasive it was taught as biological fact in school curricula, printed on cafeteria posters, and delivered by a parade of celebrities with white upper lips. Dairy is a source of calcium. It is not the only source, not a prerequisite for bone health, and the countries that consume the most dairy do not consistently show the best bone density outcomes. The calcium paradox is a well-documented epidemiological puzzle. Countries with the highest dairy consumption, including Scandinavia and the United States, have among the highest rates of osteoporosis globally. Bone health is a multi-nutrient function requiring vitamin D for calcium absorption, vitamin K2 to direct calcium to bone tissue rather than arterial walls, magnesium for proper bone metabolism, and adequate protein. Dairy alone does not provide this full matrix. High-calcium, non-dairy sources include kale, bok choy, fortified plant milks, canned sardines with bones, white beans, and almonds. Weight-bearing exercise has been demonstrated in multiple clinical trials to have a stronger effect on bone mineral density than calcium intake alone. The dairy industry ran one of the most effective nutrition marketing campaigns in modern history, and the result is that most people cannot name a non-dairy source of calcium. Your skeleton does not have a brand preference. 34, 6 meals a day, never let your metabolism go cold, keep the furnace fed, eat every 2 to 3 hours, or your body enters some kind of emergency conservation mode that undoes your efforts and punishes your scheduling discipline. Bodybuilding culture turned meal frequency into a metabolic ideology, and the supplement industry built entire product lines around the premise that constant feeding was the key to a functioning metabolism. Meal frequency has no meaningful effect on metabolic rate when total caloric intake is equalized. The thermic effect of food, the energy required to digest, absorb, and metabolize a meal, is approximately 10% of total caloric intake. This 10% is constant, regardless of whether those calories arrive in 2 meals or 8. Dividing the same total into smaller portions produces the same total thermic expenditure, because the cost is proportional to the size of the meal being processed, not to the number of processing events. Multiple controlled metabolic studies, including a frequently cited review published in Nutrition Reviews, found no significant difference in 24-hour energy expenditure, fat oxidation, or body composition between subjects eating 2 to 3 meals versus 5 to 6 meals when total calories were identical. The belief that metabolic rate drops significantly between meals, entering a starvation mode that necessitates constant feeding, is not supported by the physiological timeline. Meaningful metabolic rate reduction through caloric restriction takes days, not hours. Your metabolism is not a campfire. It's a furnace running on total fuel load. 35. Protein turns to fat if you don't exercise enough. Eat too much of it while living a sedentary life, and it gets converted directly into body fat, sitting there as irrefutable evidence that you consumed virtue without doing the work to deserve it. The implication is that protein is conditionally healthy, virtuous for the active and treacherous for the sedentary, which makes it sound considerably more dramatic than the actual biochemistry supports. Excess protein can contribute to a caloric surplus, which promotes fat storage, but protein has a lower conversion efficiency to body fat than carbohydrates or dietary fat, and the mechanism is indirect rather than the direct pipeline people imagine. Protein contains 4 calories per gram and carries the highest thermic effect of any macronutrient. Approximately 20 to 30% of protein calories are burned in the process of digesting and metabolizing protein itself. Carbohydrates have a thermic effect of approximately 5 to 10%, and dietary fat approximately 0 to 3%. The process of converting protein directly to stored fat is metabolically expensive and inefficient, and research has shown that direct conversion of dietary protein to stored fat is extremely limited under normal conditions. High-protein diets have consistently shown superior outcomes for fat loss and lean mass preservation compared to lower-protein diets in controlled trials, including in sedentary populations. Protein is the last macronutrient the body wants to store as fat. The myth gave it the worst possible reputation. 36. Margarine was the scientifically engineered upgrade to butter. Lower in saturated fat. Better for your heart. The responsible spread for the health-conscious household that had been paying attention to the dietary guidance of the latter half of the 20th century. Butter was the enemy. Margarine was the future. The healthy alternative turned out to contain the most definitively harmful fat category in the human diet. While butter's saturated fat risk has been substantially revised downward in the decades since. Early margarine formulations used a process called partial hydrogenation to convert liquid vegetable oils into solid spreads, and this process created trans fatty acids as a byproduct. Stick margarines from the 1960s through 90s contained trans fat levels of 20 to 40% of total fat content. Trans fats uniquely elevate LDL cholesterol while simultaneously reducing HDL cholesterol, a dual cardiovascular effect considered more harmful than the saturated fat profile of butter, which primarily raises LDL without reducing HDL. The U.S. FDA ruled in 2015 that partially hydrogenated oils were not generally recognized as safe and required their phase-out from the food supply by 2018, a regulatory acknowledgement that the original heart-healthy butter alternative was itself a cardiovascular risk. The science condemned butter, built an industrial substitute, and then spent 20 years discovering the substitute was worse. The butter sat in the refrigerator, being butter the entire time. 37. Celery is the legendary negative calorie food, so low in energy that your body burns more digesting it than it gains from eating it. The dream of a food that makes you thinner by existing in your stomach has made celery a diet staple, a guilt-free snack elevated to the status of a metabolic loophole, the food world's version of something for nothing. Celery does not have negative calories. No food does. The thermic effect of digesting any food is insufficient to exceed its caloric content, and this is not a close call. A standard celery stalk contains approximately 6 to 10 calories. The thermic effect of digesting and metabolizing food is approximately 5 to 10% of caloric content for carbohydrates and fiber, meaning the digestive cost of a celery stalk is roughly 0.3 to 1 calorie. The arithmetic does not produce a deficit by any reasonable calculation. The concept of negative calorie foods has no support in metabolic research. No peer-reviewed study has identified a food for which caloric expenditure during digestion exceeds caloric content. Celery is genuinely valuable as a low-calorie, high-water, high-fiber snack that contributes to satiety without significant caloric load. These are real virtues that do not require inventing fictional thermodynamics to be worth appreciating. Negative calorie foods are to nutrition what perpetual motion machines are to physics. They would be extraordinary. They don't exist. 38. Carbs before noon are fuel. Carbs after noon are suspicious. And carbs after 6 p.m. are practically metabolic self-destruction. The carbohydrate curfew has been enforced with the seriousness of a structural law, a rigid, time-based rule applied to one macronutrient with the confidence of someone who has personally observed the clock turn calories into fat. Carbohydrate metabolism does not change based on the position of the sun. Insulin sensitivity, the body's efficiency at processing carbohydrates, does exhibit a mild circadian rhythm, being somewhat higher in the morning than in the evening in most individuals. However, the magnitude of this difference at normal intake levels is clinically small and does not produce meaningful differences in fat storage between morning and evening carbohydrate consumption. A study published in the journal Obesity in 2011 compared subjects who ate carbohydrates concentrated at dinner versus those who spread carbohydrates throughout the day. The dinner carbohydrate group showed greater satiety, lower inflammatory markers, and similar weight loss outcomes. Post-workout carbohydrate consumption, which for many people occurs in evening hours, is specifically advantageous for glycogen replenishment, meaning restricting carbohydrates after training to comply with a time-based rule works directly against recovery. The same behavioral reality applies here as everywhere. People eating carbohydrates late tend toward ultra-processed snack foods, and that's the actual problem. The carbohydrate curfew is a behavioral rule dressed as biology. Your pasta doesn't know what time it is. 39. The daily multivitamin feels like responsible insurance. Pop one pill. Cover your nutritional gaps. Erase the guilt of yesterday's imperfect eating, and walk out the door knowing that whatever the diet missed, the capsule handled. For the majority of healthy adults eating a varied diet, multivitamins produce no measurable health benefit and exit the body primarily through urine, taking a meaningful portion of the supplement's cost along for the journey. A 2013 editorial in the Annals of Internal Medicine, signed by a panel of nutrition researchers after reviewing 3 large clinical trials, concluded that multivitamin supplements did not reduce cardiovascular events, cognitive decline, or cancer incidence in well-nourished populations. The editorial's title was, "Enough is Enough. Stop wasting money on vitamin and mineral supplements." Water-soluble vitamins, including B vitamins and vitamin C, are excreted in urine when consumed in excess of the body's immediate needs. The expensive urine problem is literally true for a significant portion of what a standard multivitamin contains. Genuine supplementation need exists for specific populations. Pregnant women need folate, Vegans need B12. People with limited sun exposure need vitamin D. These are clinical situations, not the general population reaching for a gummy out of morning routine. Whole food sources of micronutrients come packaged with fiber, phytochemicals, and antioxidants that interact synergistically in ways isolated synthetic vitamins cannot replicate. Check with a doctor whether you actually need one before assuming that you do. 40. Capsaicin burns calories, and the chili pepper is a metabolic accelerator. Certain diets have practically built their frameworks around the thermogenic promise of spicy food as a fat-burning tool you can access with every meal. Eat spicy, burn more, lose weight through the simple act of tolerating heat. Capsaicin does produce a mild, temporary increase in metabolic rate. The effect is real. The magnitude is so small it is essentially irrelevant as a weight management strategy, which is the part that doesn't make it into the wellness content. Capsaicin activates TRPV1 receptors, which among other effects can stimulate sympathetic nervous system activity, slightly elevating heart rate and thermogenesis. Studies examining this thermogenic effect have found increases in metabolic rate of approximately 4 to 5% for a short period following consumption. For a person burning 2,000 calories per day, this represents approximately 80 to 100 additional calories, and the effect diminishes with regular consumption as the body develops tolerance. A comprehensive review published in the British Journal of Nutrition found that while acute capsaicin consumption does modestly increase energy expenditure, the effect is not sustained and is insufficient to produce meaningful changes in body composition over time. The appetite suppressive effects of spicy food may actually be more practically useful than the thermogenic ones. Capsaicin burns calories the way a birthday candle heats a room. Technically true, measurably real, and completely insufficient for the job being advertised. 41. High-protein diets are hard on your kidneys. The organs work overtime, filtering all that nitrogen waste, and eventually the overload causes damage that accumulates quietly until the consequences arrive. This has been repeated by physicians, fitness skeptics, and concerned family members, with the even-handed confidence of people who believe they are delivering a legitimate safety warning to someone at risk. In people with healthy, normally functioning kidneys, high protein intake has not been shown to cause kidney damage. The contraindication applies specifically to people with pre-existing kidney disease, and applying it to healthy adults is a significant overextension of disease-specific clinical guidance. The concern is mechanistically based on the fact that protein metabolism produces nitrogenous waste, primarily urea, which the kidneys must filter. Higher protein intake does increase glomerular filtration rate, a measure of kidney workload. However, increased filtration rate is an adaptive response in healthy kidneys, not a pathological one. A 2016 study published in the Journal of Nutrition and Metabolism followed subjects consuming up to 3.4 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight daily, well above typical recommendations, and found no adverse effects on kidney function biomarkers in healthy individuals over 1 year. The clinical guidance to restrict protein in kidney disease patients is legitimate and important. Damaged kidneys with reduced filtering capacity cannot adapt the way healthy kidneys can. Telling a person with healthy kidneys to limit protein because kidney disease patients need to is applying the wrong patient's prescription to the wrong person. 42. Dark chocolate is practically medicine. Antioxidants, cardiovascular benefits, mood elevation, cognitive support. The research said so. The headlines confirmed it. And you have been eating it with the self-congratulatory confidence of someone taking a supplement while technically having dessert. Dark chocolate contains real antioxidants, primarily flavonoids including epicatechin and catechin, and the health claims are not fabricated from nothing. The problem is the gap between what the laboratory found and what ends up in your wrapper. The flavonoid content in commercial dark chocolate varies enormously based on how the cacao was processed. Dutch processing, used to reduce chocolate's natural bitterness, dramatically reduces flavonoid content, by up to 90% according to some analyses. yet the product still receives the dark chocolate label with its full health association intact. Many positive studies on chocolate and cardiovascular markers used concentrated cocoa supplements rather than standard commercial chocolate bars, meaning the dose of active compounds was far higher than a normal serving of anything available in a grocery store provides. Dark chocolate also contains approximately 170 calories per ounce, alongside saturated fat and sugar. Consuming it in quantities that would deliver therapeutically relevant flavonoid doses would represent a substantial caloric commitment that somewhat complicates the health narrative. Dark chocolate is enjoyable. The health benefits are real, but significantly more fragile than the marketing suggests. Eat it because it tastes good. The cardiovascular story is a supporting argument, not a prescription. 43. Calcium builds teeth. Dairy has calcium. Therefore, dairy builds teeth. The same logic chain that captured bones gets applied to dental health with equal confidence and similar marketing support, extending the reach of the dairy industry's nutritional story from your skeleton to your smile. The relationship between dairy consumption and dental health is considerably more complicated than this, and the sugar content of flavored dairy products can actively harm the teeth the product is supposedly protecting. Tooth enamel is composed primarily of hydroxyapatite, a crystalline calcium phosphate mineral, and adequate calcium and phosphate are necessary for enamel formation during development and for remineralization. However, once adult teeth are fully formed, systemic calcium intake plays a much smaller role in dental health than topical factors. The pH environment in your mouth, fluoride exposure, and oral hygiene practices have far greater impact on enamel integrity than dietary calcium levels. Flavored milks and dairy products with added sugar contribute directly to the acidic oral environment that drives enamel erosion and cavity formation, and the calcium in the product does not cancel out the damage done by the sugar it arrives packaged with. Cheese has genuine tooth protective properties supported by research. It raises oral pH and contains proteins that buffer acids. But this benefit doesn't extend uniformly to all dairy products. The calcium in milk is real. Its relationship to your adult teeth is considerably more indirect than the campaign ever let on. 44. Fresh is best. Fresh means alive, nutritious, full of vitality, and optimally representative of what food is before compromise sets in. Frozen is the concession, the nutritional backup plan, the option for people who couldn't get to the market often enough, or who prioritize convenience over quality. Frozen vegetables are frequently more nutritious than the fresh produce sold in supermarkets, because they are frozen within hours of harvest at peak ripeness, while fresh produce often spends days in transit and display before it reaches you. Most commercial frozen vegetables are processed within hours of harvest, blanched briefly to deactivate degrading enzymes, then flash frozen at temperatures that halt nutrient loss. Fresh produce in a supermarket has often traveled hundreds to thousands of miles over multiple days, been held in controlled atmosphere storage, and sat in refrigerated display for additional days. Vitamin C and B vitamin content in produce can degrade significantly during this process. Studies have found vitamin C losses of 15 to 50% in some vegetables between harvest and retail consumption. A 2017 study by the University of California, Davis found that frozen peas, green beans, corn, and spinach had comparable or superior levels of certain vitamins compared to fresh equivalents stored for several days. The frozen broccoli was frozen within hours of leaving the field. The fresh broccoli on the shelf may have been picked 10 days ago. Freshness is a function of time elapsed since harvest, not whether the vegetable is currently cold or room temperature at point of sale. 45. Coffee doesn't count toward your hydration. It's a diuretic, and for every cup you drink, you've created a fluid deficit that must be compensated with additional water, meaning coffee drinkers exist in a state of perpetual thirst debt that they can only service by drinking more of the beverage that created the problem. Coffee does have a mild diuretic effect, It also contains enough water that the net hydration impact for moderate coffee drinkers is essentially neutral or mildly positive, which is the part of the story that gets left out when the diuretic label gets applied. Caffeine inhibits renal tubular reabsorption of sodium and water, increasing urine output. This effect is real and well documented. However, the magnitude of the diuretic effect in habitual coffee drinkers is substantially attenuated by tolerance that develops to caffeine's diuretic properties over regular consumption. A study published in the Journal of Human Nutrition and Dietetics in 2014 found that moderate coffee consumption of 3 to 6 cups daily produced identical 24-hour hydration outcomes compared to equivalent water consumption in habitual drinkers. No significant difference in any hydration biomarker. A standard cup of coffee is approximately 95 to 98% water. The European Food Safety Authority and the U.S. Institute of Medicine both recognize coffee and tea as contributing to daily fluid intake. A substance that is 97% water does not dehydrate you through the 3% that happens to be a mild diuretic. Count your coffee. It counts. 46. A calorie is a calorie. 500 calories of anything is 500 calories. Energy is energy. And anyone who disputes this elegant equation is making excuses or selling a book. The framework sounds like physics and has the appeal of something that cannot be argued with because the math is literally correct. Calories are a unit of energy measurement, not a description of biological outcome. And what happens to 500 calories inside a human body varies dramatically. Based on food source, macronutrient composition, fiber content, and hormonal effects. Protein calories carry a thermic effect of 20 to 30%, meaning roughly 100 to 150 calories of every 500 protein calories are burned in digestion. Refined carbohydrates carry approximately 5 to 10%. And dietary fat approximately 0 to 3%. The net metabolically available energy from identical calorie counts differs based on what the food is made of. Fiber content alters caloric availability. The calories in whole almonds that your body can actually absorb are lower than the label indicates because insoluble fiber and cell wall structure limit digestive access, delivering approximately 20% fewer absorbable calories than listed. Fructose doesn't trigger insulin or leptin response to the same degree as glucose, meaning 500 fructose calories and 500 protein calories produce very different hunger signals hours later. The calories in calories out framework is thermodynamically correct and practically incomplete. It treats your body as a uniform combustion chamber. Your body is not a combustion chamber. It's a negotiation. 47. Eat less and lose weight. Dramatic restriction produces dramatic results, and the most efficient route to the outcome you want is simply consuming as little as possible until you get there, then resuming normal eating with the problem permanently solved. The logic tracks on a spreadsheet and produces results on a scale, temporarily, before the body's adaptive response changes the conditions of the calculation. Severe caloric restriction triggers metabolic adaptation. The body reduces basal metabolic rate, lowers body temperature, reduces spontaneous physical activity, and increases the efficiency of energy use to defend against what it interprets as famine. Research on contestants from the television program The Biggest Loser, published in the journal Obesity in 2016, found that 6 years after the competition, contestants showed dramatically suppressed resting metabolic rates. Some burning 500 or more fewer calories per day than would be predicted for people of their current weight, and had regained the majority of lost weight. Severe restriction also preferentially causes loss of lean muscle mass alongside fat, reducing metabolic capacity further, and making subsequent weight loss attempts progressively more difficult. The Minnesota starvation experiment of 1944 to 1945 provided early documentation of the psychological consequences: food preoccupation, disordered eating patterns, and binge behavior that accompany severe caloric restriction. Your body is not trying to sabotage you. It is trying to keep you alive. It is extraordinarily good at this, and when you declare war on it through severe restriction, it will win. 48. The overnight fast threatens muscle. While you sleep, your body catabolizes its own lean tissue for fuel unless you feed it before bed, specifically a slow-digesting protein, which is why the casein shake before sleep became a bodybuilding ritual treated with the seriousness of a legitimate biological necessity. The catabolic risk of an overnight fast in well-nourished individuals is minimal, and the body has effective mechanisms for preserving lean tissue during normal sleep periods that do not require pre-sleep supplementation to function. Gluconeogenesis, the liver's production of glucose from non-carbohydrate sources including amino acids, does occur during fasting states. However, the body prioritizes glycogen stores and fatty acids before drawing on muscle protein in well-nourished individuals, meaning the scenario of muscle being consumed during sleep requires a level of nutritional deprivation that a normal evening meal followed by sleep does not create. A study published in Medicine and Science in Sports and Exercise found that pre-sleep protein consumption did increase overnight muscle protein synthesis rates compared to a placebo, demonstrating a real effect. However, the practical significance of this effect on long-term muscle outcomes is substantially reduced when total daily protein intake is adequately controlled. Intermittent fasting protocols extending the overnight fast significantly beyond normal sleep duration do not consistently show muscle loss in studies that equalize total daily protein intake. The pre-bed protein ritual helps in specific circumstances. As a universal biological requirement, it's a supplement marketing with selectively applied science attached to make it sound like a medical necessity. 49. Agave syrup arrived with an impeccable wellness story. Natural, plant-derived, low glycemic, rooted in ancient use. Health food stores positioned it as the enlightened alternative to refined sugar, and it found its way into the kitchens of people who were trying to make genuinely better choices, but who were handed a product whose health case was built on exactly one favorable metric while concealing the rest. Agave syrup's low glycemic index is entirely a function of its extremely high fructose content, which bypasses blood glucose response while delivering a heavy fructose load directly to the liver, with metabolic consequences that may be worse than table sugar, not better. Commercial agave syrup contains approximately 70 to 90% fructose, making it a higher fructose product than high fructose corn syrup at 55% and table sugar at 50%. Fructose is metabolized almost exclusively in the liver, where it can contribute to conversion of energy to fat, elevated blood triglycerides, and over time, with high consumption, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. The natural and traditional branding of agave syrup is also largely misleading. Commercial production involves an industrial hydrolysis process that converts agave plant starches into concentrated fructose, bearing little resemblance to traditional agave preparations. A 2009 clinical trial found that fructose overfeeding produced greater visceral fat accumulation and insulin resistance than glucose overfeeding over 10 weeks. Agave syrup scores perfectly on one test by failing everything else. The wellness story was marketing. The metabolism is chemistry. 50. Cold water makes your body work to warm it up, burning calories in the process, and this has been promoted as a free metabolic bonus available to anyone willing to choose cold over room temperature. It circulates in weight loss communities with unearned authority, occasionally with enough numerical specificity to sound like it was extracted from an actual study rather than back-calculated from someone's wishful thermodynamics. The body does expend energy-warming ingested cold water. The quantity of that energy expenditure is so small as to be functionally irrelevant as a weight management strategy, even when the arithmetic is performed generously. The energy required to warm 500 milliliters of ice-cold water at 0 degrees Celsius to body temperature at 37 degrees Celsius can be calculated directly. It takes approximately 1 kilocalorie to raise 1 kilogram of water by 1 degree Celsius, meaning warming that amount of water by 37 degrees requires approximately 18.5 kilocalories. roughly the equivalent of half a small cracker. Over a full day of drinking 8 glasses of ice-cold water instead of room temperature water, the total caloric expenditure difference reaches approximately 70 to 100 kilocalories, a figure offset entirely by one small dietary slip and irrelevant in any honest accounting of weight management variables. No peer-reviewed clinical research has demonstrated meaningful long-term body composition differences attributable to water temperature. You are burning the caloric equivalent of 2 potato chips by choosing cold over room temperature. The ice is decoration. The diet is doing no work here whatsoever. 51. Eating red meat causes cancer. The headline landed, the panic spread, and millions of people treated a burger like a scheduled oncological event, while the nuance that would have made the finding actionable sat quietly in the middle paragraphs of the original report, unread. Processed red meat has a meaningful association with colorectal cancer risk. Unprocessed red meat has a weaker, more contested association. The categorical claim that red meat causes cancer is a significant oversimplification of what the evidence actually says, and the distinction matters for anyone trying to make genuinely informed dietary choices. In 2015, the World Health Organization's International Agency for Research on Cancer classified processed meats, bacon, hot dogs, sausages, as Group 1 carcinogens, meaning sufficient evidence exists for a causal link, and classified unprocessed red meat as Group 2A, meaning probably carcinogenic. Headlines collapsed these two distinct classifications into one statement. The Group 1 classification does not indicate magnitude of risk. Alcohol, tobacco, and processed meat all share the category. The absolute risk increase from eating approximately 50 grams of processed meat daily is estimated at roughly an 18% relative increase in colorectal cancer risk, translating to an increase from approximately 5 in 100 lifetime risk to 6 in 100. A real increase, not a trivial one, but not the apocalyptic figure the headlines implied. A large 2019 systematic review concluded that the evidence for reducing unprocessed red meat was of low certainty, and that absolute risk reductions from reduction were small. The science identified a signal. The headline turned the signal into a verdict. 52. Every teenager who ever had a breakout was told that chocolate was responsible, and the dermatological common knowledge was delivered with the certainty of observed fact. Generations of skin complaints attributed to a single food with the confidence of people who had personally watched the correlation play out enough times to stop questioning it. The direct causal link between chocolate consumption and acne has not been established in controlled clinical research, and the relationship is considerably more complicated than the conviction behind the warning suggests. A 1969 study published in the Journal of the American Medical Association followed 65 subjects and found no difference in acne severity between those consuming chocolate bars and those consuming identical calorie placebo bars. More recent research has focused on dietary glycemic index as the more plausible acne driver. High glycemic foods spike insulin and insulin-like growth factor 1, which stimulates sebum production and skin cell proliferation, both acne-promoting processes. Commercial chocolate is high in sugar, which is a high glycemic ingredient, making the correlation with acne partially real but attributable to the sugar rather than the cocoa. Pure dark chocolate with minimal sugar has not shown acne-promoting effects in small controlled studies, further suggesting the sugar content is the relevant variable. Dairy consumption has a stronger research-supported association with acne than chocolate does, through IGF-1 and hormonal mechanisms, yet dairy rarely receives the blame that chocolate historically absorbed. The wrong ingredient was convicted, and the sentence lasted 40 years. 53. The post-Thanksgiving coma is universally blamed on turkey's tryptophan, explained with confident authority at every holiday table by someone who learned the word tryptophan, specifically for this moment, and has been waiting all year to deploy it. Turkey does contain tryptophan, but not in quantities meaningfully different from chicken, beef, or cheese, and the post-meal exhaustion comes from eating an enormous multi-course meal with alcohol. The tryptophan is a passenger in this situation, not the driver. Tryptophan is an amino acid precursor to serotonin and melatonin, and when consumed in isolated high doses, it can promote drowsiness. This pharmacological action is real. The problem is that consuming tryptophan as part of a protein-rich meal means it competes with other large neutral amino acids for transport across the blood-brain barrier, substantially reducing its brain uptake. Turkey contains approximately 250 milligrams of tryptophan per 100 grams. Chicken contains approximately 270 milligrams, cheddar cheese approximately 320 milligrams, and pork approximately 220 milligrams, all comparable or higher than turkey. Nobody blames their Tuesday chicken dinner for an afternoon collapse. The primary mechanism of post-meal drowsiness following a large holiday meal is attributable to parasympathetic nervous system dominance, triggered by caloric volume, increased blood flow to the gastrointestinal tract, and alcohol's well-established sedating properties. The turkey didn't sedate the room. You ate a 4-course meal with wine and sat on a soft sofa. The tryptophan gets credit because it sounds scientific. 54. Plant-based equals health, and the moment you remove animal products from a diet, it becomes inherently better, cleaner, lighter, more aligned with optimal human nutrition. The dietary identity doing the nutritional work so the individual doesn't have to examine what they're actually eating with any particular rigor. A vegetarian or vegan diet can be extremely healthy or profoundly nutritionally inadequate, depending entirely on what it actually contains. And the absence of animal products is not a nutritional guarantee that anyone has earned the right to claim without reading their own food labels. Ultra-processed vegan products, vegan burgers, vegan cheeses, vegan sausages, plant-based packaged snacks often contain comparable or higher levels of sodium, saturated fat, and refined carbohydrates than the animal products they replace. Oreos are vegan. The vegan label does not correlate with lower processing levels. Well-planned vegan diets do require supplementation or careful dietary planning to avoid genuine deficiencies. Vitamin B12 found almost exclusively in animal products. Vitamin D3, long-chain omega-3 fatty acids, iodine, and zinc are all nutrients requiring deliberate attention on a fully plant-based diet. The health outcomes associated with plant-based diets in epidemiological research are also substantially confounded by healthy user bias. People who adopt these diets are more likely to exercise, avoid smoking, and attend regular medical care, making attribution of benefits specifically to dietary pattern difficult to isolate. Plant-based is a production method category, not a nutritional quality certification. The label describes what's absent, not what's present. 55. Do enough crunches and the belly fat will respond. Enough inner thigh exercises and the thighs will lean out. Targeted movements producing targeted fat loss in the targeted area. The fitness industry has sold more equipment and more programs on this single premise than almost any other idea in the history of commercial exercise. Spot reduction of body fat is not physiologically possible. Fat loss occurs systemically based on total caloric deficit and distributes according to genetics, not exercise selection, which means the area you're working. The hardest is not necessarily the area losing fat first or at all. Fat cells store energy as triglycerides and release them as free fatty acids into the bloodstream during caloric deficit. These fatty acids circulate through the blood to be oxidized wherever the body needs fuel. They are not preferentially drawn from the fat cells nearest the working muscle, because the cardiovascular system doesn't operate on a neighborhood preference system. A well-cited 2011 study, published in the Journal of Strength and Conditioning Research, had subjects perform leg press and abdominal exercises on one side only for 12 weeks. Fat biopsies and measurements confirmed equivalent fat loss on both sides of the body. Exercise placement did not determine fat loss location. The toned appearance in a specific area comes from building local muscle combined with overall body fat reduction from total caloric deficit. Exercise selection shapes the muscle underneath. Deficit removes the fat on top. They are different mechanisms. Doing crunches to lose belly fat is like turning the steering wheel of a parked car. 56. Once a cold arrives, the vitamin C tablets emerge in larger quantities. Megadosing ascorbic acid when sick is a separate and equally persistent belief from the prevention myth, operating on the logic that flooding the system with the right nutrient should accelerate the body's ability to fight off what has already taken hold. Once a cold is established, megadosing vitamin C does not significantly accelerate recovery, and the body's absorption capacity creates a ceiling that makes the strategy self-defeating well before the quantities people typically consume during illness. Vitamin C absorption is dose-dependent and non-linear. At doses of 200 milligrams, absorption efficiency approaches 100%. At doses of 1,000 milligrams, absorption drops to approximately 50%. At higher doses, efficiency continues to fall, and unabsorbed vitamin C passes directly through the gut, causing osmotic diarrhea, making the primary clinical outcome of megadosing a gastrointestinal one rather than an immunological one. The tolerable upper intake level established by the Institute of Medicine is 2,000 milligrams per day for adults, above which gastrointestinal disturbance and kidney oxalate stone risk become meaningful concerns. The same Cochrane review that addressed prevention also evaluated therapeutic dosing after cold onset and found no consistent evidence that high-dose vitamin C taken at symptom onset reduced cold duration or severity compared to placebo in the general population. The body maintains plasma vitamin C saturation at relatively stable levels. Once tissues are saturated, additional intake has no further biological activity and exits through urine. The cold is not impressed by the effort. 57. Milk is a fundamental human food. Natural, complete, designed to nourish, central to dietary guidelines globally for decades, feeling as foundational as any food could possibly be. Cow's milk is biologically formulated to grow a calf from approximately 90 pounds to 600 pounds in its first year of life. The nutritional profile is optimized for bovine neonatal development, not for human adult nutrition, which is a reasonable starting point for any conversation about whether this food is the universal human requirement it has been marketed as. Lactase persistence, the ability to digest lactose into adulthood, is a genetic mutation that arose approximately 7,500 years ago in a small northern European population. Globally, approximately 65 to 70% of adults have some degree of lactose malabsorption, meaning the majority of the human species is not biologically equipped to fully digest cow's milk. The populations with high dairy tolerance are the exception, not the baseline of human biology. The historical centrality of dairy to Western dietary guidelines was also heavily influenced by agricultural policy and industry lobbying, a relationship that was the subject of investigative reporting and academic critique throughout the late 20th century. Many populations with no significant dairy tradition maintain adequate calcium nutrition through diverse food sources and have not historically exhibited the bone disease rates the dairy-bone connection would predict. Milk is not bad food for those who tolerate it well. It is not the universal human birthright it was marketed as being. 58. The glass of red wine with dinner has been permission slipped by science itself. Resveratrol, the Mediterranean diet, the French paradox, and the cardiovascular benefits of moderate red wine consumption became cultural consensus delivered with the warmth of something that feels true because you very much want it to be true. The resveratrol quantities in a glass of wine are pharmacologically trivial. The epidemiological studies cannot isolate wine as the operative variable, and the French paradox has multiple better explanations that don't require a nightly glass to be responsible for anything. Resveratrol is present in red wine at approximately 0.1 to 1 milligram per glass. Studies showing beneficial effects of resveratrol used doses hundreds to thousands of times higher. You would need to drink hundreds of bottles daily to approach equivalent blood levels, which would produce outcomes not typically described as cardiovascular protection. The French paradox has been explained by differences in portion sizes, lower ultra-processed food consumption, greater physical activity, potential underreporting of cardiac deaths in French medical records, and the overall dietary pattern rather than wine specifically. Alcohol is classified by the International Agency for Research on Cancer as a Group 1 carcinogen. There is sufficient evidence it causes cancer regardless of beverage type or quantity. A major 2018 study in The Lancet concluded the safest level of alcohol consumption was 0. Enjoy the wine. Just stop logging it as cardiology. The health case is built on quantities that would require a different kind of medical help entirely. 59. Coconut oil arrived in the wellness world like a dietary savior. Ancient, natural, rich in medium-chain triglycerides, the fat that supposedly doesn't behave like fat, and a supermarket staple elevated to nutritional ideology by a wellness industry that needed the next category. Defining product to replace the previous one it had finished monetizing. Coconut oil is approximately 82 to 92% saturated fat, the highest saturated fat content of any commonly used cooking oil, and the general health benefits claimed for it are not supported by clinical evidence in the way the marketing implied they were. In 2017, the American Heart Association issued an advisory reconfirming the link between saturated fat intake and cardiovascular disease risk, and explicitly advised against using coconut oil as a replacement for unsaturated fat-rich oils, noting that its saturated fat content raised LDL cholesterol more than most other fats. The medium-chain triglyceride argument is central to the coconut oil narrative, but the predominant MCT in coconut oil is lauric acid at 12 carbons, which behaves more like a long-chain fatty acid than the shorter-chain C8 and C10 MCTs used in research demonstrating MCT's metabolic benefits. The wellness industry positioned coconut oil as an ancestral food with centuries of use, while avoiding the fact that populations using it as a dietary staple also had very different overall dietary patterns and cardiovascular risk profiles. Coconut oil went from zero to lifestyle in 3 years, primarily by being exotic, ancient-sounding, and aggressively marketed. The science didn't endorse it. The branding did. 60. Processed food has become a shorthand for poison. A category so contaminated that avoiding it entirely is the first commandment of clean eating, the foundational rule from which all other dietary virtue flows. Processed is bad. Unprocessed is good. The rule sounds clean until you discover that the category called processed covers a spectrum running from washed and bagged spinach to a laboratory-engineered snack product with 47 ingredients, and that condemning everything in that range with a single word obscures more than it communicates. The Nova Food Classification System, developed by Brazilian nutrition researchers, attempts to solve this by sorting foods into 4 categories, with ultra-processed foods in the 4th group representing the category where the clinical research on processing harms actually concentrates. Many processed foods are nutritionally superior to their unprocessed alternatives. Pasteurization of milk kills dangerous pathogens. Iodization of salt prevents thyroid disease. Fortification of flour with B vitamins prevents neural tube defects. Frozen vegetables are processed. Canned legumes are processed. Yogurt is processed. These are among the most nutritionally recommended foods in clinical dietetics. The genuine problem category, ultra-processed foods, high in refined carbohydrates, industrial seed oils, emulsifiers, and added sugars, is real and well supported by research. The imprecise use of processed as the descriptor obscures rather than communicates the actual concern. Name the category you mean. Ultra-processed. The word exists, and it says exactly what you're trying to say without condemning a bag of pre-washed salad. 61. Add salt before boiling to speed up the process. a persistent kitchen instruction delivered by people who are certain enough about it to pass it along with authority, contributing to a culinary mythology that conflates the physics of dissolved solutes with the actual reason professional cooks reach for the salt box when water goes on the stove. Salt raises the boiling point of water, meaning it requires more heat to boil, not less. And the boiling point effect at culinary salt quantities is so trivially small that it has no measurable impact on cooking time in any practical kitchen setting. Boiling point elevation is a real thermodynamic phenomenon. Dissolved solutes do raise the boiling point of water. Adding the quantity of salt used in pasta cooking, typically 1 to 2 tablespoons per 4 to 6 liters of water, raises the boiling point by approximately 0.5 degrees Celsius or less. At domestic stove heat output levels, this is unmeasurable in any practical timing context. The actual and entirely legitimate reason to salt pasta water generously is flavor. Pasta absorbs water as it cooks, and that absorbed water becomes part of the pasta's interior. Properly salted water produces better flavored pasta without requiring additional salt after plating, a technique universally endorsed by culinary professionals for the right reason. You were right to salt the water. You were wrong about why for the entirety of your cooking life. Salt is doing seasoning work, not physics work. The water is not boiling faster. The pasta just tastes better. 62. You've been told since grade school that you only use 10% of your brain, and the supplement industry, the cognitive enhancement market, and every brain food product category has built significant commercial infrastructure on the corollary that the other 90% is sitting idle, waiting to be unlocked by the right nutrient, the right practice, or the right product sold to you by someone who also believes the 10% claim. Humans use virtually all of their brain across the course of a normal day. Different regions are active at different times, but over any reasonable time window, neuroimaging shows activity distributed across essentially the entire brain. No large region of neural real estate sits permanently dormant. The brain consumes approximately 20% of total body energy, despite comprising roughly 2% of body mass, which is an evolutionary investment that would never have been maintained if 90% of the organ were unused backup capacity. The origin of the myth is contested, variously attributed to misquotes of William James, misinterpretations of early neuroscience research, and early lobotomy-era observations. But no verified primary source for the 10% figure exists in the scientific literature. Neurological disease has effectively disproven the myth without intending to. Alzheimer's disease, stroke, and traumatic brain injuries all produce specific functional losses based on which region is damaged, demonstrating that each region serves an active function rather than representing available storage space. Every supplement promising to unlock your unused brain capacity is selling access to a room that's already fully occupied and running at capacity. 63. Protein bars sit in the health section, carry macronutrient labels, appear in gym bags and health food store checkout lines, and communicate discipline, fitness, and nutritional purpose through packaging design choices that have been tested extensively against exactly the kind of person who is about to spend $4 on something that belongs in the candy aisle. Many commercial protein bars are candy bars with whey isolate added and a fitness-adjacent label applied over the top, and the ingredient list tells a substantially different story than the packaging is designed to tell. A survey of popular protein bars reveals that many contain 20 to 30 grams of protein alongside 25 to 40 grams of sugar, significant quantities of sugar alcohols that cause gastrointestinal distress at the doses present, hydrogenated oils, artificial flavors, and a caloric density of 250 to 400 calories, comparable to a standard candy bar in most meaningful respects. The FDA does not regulate the term protein bar as a health claim category, meaning any caloric product with added protein can use the designation regardless of its overall nutritional profile. Sugar alcohols used in low-sugar protein bars to maintain sweetness, maltitol, xylitol, sorbitol, have well-documented laxative effects at the quantities found in some products, meaning the primary physical consequence of certain protein bars is gastrointestinal rather than muscular. If the ingredient list contains more than a handful of items, and several of them read like chemistry coursework, the gym bag the bar came from is doing more for your health than the bar itself. 64. Fasted cardio burns more fat. Train in the morning on an empty stomach, and your body has no choice but to oxidize fat for fuel, giving you a metabolic advantage that the person who ate breakfast before their workout simply cannot access. The logic circulates in every fitness community with the confidence of something that has been observed and confirmed rather than assumed and repeated. Fasted exercise does increase fat oxidation during the session. This is metabolically accurate. Total fat loss over time shows no consistent advantage from fasted training compared to fed training when total caloric intake is controlled, which is the variable that actually determines the outcome you care about. The distinction between fat oxidation during a session and net fat loss over time is critical and routinely collapsed into the same claim by people selling the concept. Your body burns more fat as a fuel source during a fasted workout. However, post-exercise fat oxidation and overall 24-hour energy balance also determine outcomes, and fed exercise often allows higher training intensity and volume, potentially producing greater total caloric expenditure that offsets the fasted oxidation advantage. A 2014 study published in the Journal of the International Society of Sports Nutrition examined body composition changes in subjects performing fasted versus fed aerobic exercise, while equalized for total caloric intake. After 4 weeks, no significant difference in fat loss or lean mass preservation was found between groups. You burned more fat during the fasted session. The long-run caloric math is what settles the question, and it doesn't particularly care when you last ate. 65. Antioxidants fight free radicals. Free radicals cause disease and aging, and therefore maximum antioxidant intake equals maximum health protection. Pile them in, supplement aggressively, seek out every product with antioxidant fortification, because more of what fights disease must be better than less of it. Antioxidant supplementation in clinical trials has repeatedly failed to produce the health benefits predicted by this logic, and in some significant cases has produced harm, which is the outcome the decade of enthusiasm for antioxidant supplements did not anticipate, and the industry has not been eager to broadcast. The beta-carotene and retinol efficacy trial, a large clinical trial in the 1990s, was stopped early when high-dose beta-carotene and vitamin A supplementation in smokers and asbestos workers significantly increased lung cancer incidence and mortality, the opposite of the anticipated protective effect. Similarly, the alpha-tocopherol beta-carotene cancer prevention study found that beta-carotene supplementation increased lung cancer risk in male smokers by 18%, again reversing expectations. Free radicals, while genuinely damaging in excess, also serve important biological signaling functions, including regulating immune response and activating pathways that stimulate the body's own antioxidant defenses. Saturating the system with exogenous antioxidants can disrupt these adaptive signaling pathways rather than supplement them. Antioxidants from whole foods in natural concentrations consistently show health associations in epidemiology. Isolated high-dose antioxidant supplements have consistently failed or harmed in controlled trials. The food matrix appears to be a critical variable that the supplement cannot replicate. More is not always better. Sometimes it is specifically worse. 66. The warm lemon water ritual has become the entry ceremony of wellness culture. The thing you do first thing in the morning to signal that today will be disciplined, that your liver is about to receive assistance from the kitchen, and that you are someone who takes these matters seriously before the rest of the household is even awake. Warm water with lemon provides hydration, a trivial dose of vitamin C, and some genuine culinary pleasure. It does not detoxify, alkalinize your body, or accelerate any liver function beyond the continuous baseline operation your liver has been performing without any citrus assistance since before you discovered wellness content. The detoxification claim overlaps with the cleanse mythology addressed earlier. The liver processes toxins continuously and does not require lemon-infused hydration to perform this function more effectively. The alkalizing claim is particularly popular and particularly confused. Lemon juice is acidic, with a pH of approximately 2 to 3. Proponents acknowledge the acidity and claim it becomes alkaline forming after digestion. The human body maintains blood pH in an extremely narrow range of 7.35 to 7.45, regardless of what is consumed, and dietary content cannot alter blood pH in any meaningful way. Lemon juice is also erosive to dental enamel due to its citric acid content, and drinking it undiluted or brushing teeth immediately after consumption can accelerate enamel erosion, a real clinical concern being observed by dentists watching this trend. The ritual is for you. The liver has been handling its responsibilities without it every morning of your life. 67. The fat-free dressing feels like the responsible finishing touch on an already virtuous meal. The one small concession to discipline that completes the health narrative of ordering a salad in the first place. You're having vegetables, after all. The fat-free dressing closes the loop. Fat-free dressings replace fat with sugar, salt, and thickeners. And more critically, fat is required to absorb the fat-soluble vitamins and carotenoids from the vegetables in the salad, meaning a salad consumed with fat-free dressing delivers a meaningfully reduced fraction of the nutritional value you ordered it to obtain. Vitamins A, D, E, and K are fat-soluble. They require the presence of dietary fat for absorption through the intestinal wall. Carotenoids, including beta-carotene, lycopene, and lutein, are similarly fat-soluble and require fat co-consumption for optimal bioavailability. A landmark 2004 study by Unlu and colleagues published in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition demonstrated that consuming salads with fat-free dressing produced virtually no measurable absorption of carotenoids, while the same salads consumed with full-fat dressing produced robust carotenoid absorption. Effectively, the fat-free dressing salad was nutritionally inert from a carotenoid standpoint. Fat-free dressings compensate for lost flavor and texture through added sugar of 4 to 8 grams per serving, salt, modified food starch, and artificial flavors. You bought a salad for the vegetables and applied a dressing that makes the vegetable nutrients unavailable. The fat-free dressing is not a conservative choice. It is a trade. The vegetables were there. They just weren't getting in. 68. Pregnant women are warned away from spicy food by family members, cautious internet forums, and a general cultural consensus suggesting that anything intense or stimulating should be avoided during pregnancy, on the principle that, if in doubt, restrict, which sounds precautionary and responsible until you examine the actual obstetric evidence for the specific claim being made. There is no clinical evidence that moderate spicy food consumption harms a developing fetus or increases pregnancy complications, and the advice appears to be based on cultural anxiety rather than anything that has been tested and confirmed in a research context. The most commonly cited concern, that spicy food causes uterine contractions or premature labor, has no supporting evidence in obstetric literature. Capsaicin does not have a documented uterotonic effect at dietary doses. Heartburn and acid reflux are genuine common complaints in pregnancy due to progesterone relaxing the lower esophageal sphincter, and the growing uterus creating abdominal pressure, and spicy food can exacerbate these symptoms in individuals prone to them. But this is a comfort issue, not a safety one, and varies considerably between individuals. Many of the world's populations with the highest spicy food consumption, including Indian, Thai, Mexican, and Ethiopian populations, have no associated adverse pregnancy outcomes attributable to dietary capsaicin, and spicy food is consumed routinely throughout pregnancy in these culinary traditions without restriction. Fetal flavor learning research has actually found that flavors from maternal diet are transmitted to amniotic fluid and may support acceptance of those flavors in early childhood. The prohibition is medical folklore. If heartburn wasn't already an issue, the chili isn't the problem. 69. Properly stored honey has an extraordinary shelf life. Sealed vessels, low humidity, stable temperature, total exclusion of moisture, and the ancient honey found in Egyptian tombs, some reportedly 3,000 years old, was genuinely still edible under those specific conditions. This becomes the honey lasts forever claim applied to the open jar on your counter that you've been digging into with a wet spoon for 8 months while the kitchen humidity fluctuates beside the stove. Honey's preservation properties come from 3 factors: very low moisture content, typically under 20%, extremely low water activity, which prevents microbial growth, and naturally occurring hydrogen peroxide produced by the enzyme glucose oxidase. Together, these create an inhospitable environment for most bacteria and fungi under the right conditions. Modern commercial honey can ferment if water content exceeds approximately 20%. Immature honey, diluted honey, or honey stored in humid conditions can be colonized by osmophilic yeasts that cause fermentation, producing off flavors and alcohol. Crystallized honey is not spoiled, but it represents a structural change that signals moisture and temperature fluctuation have been occurring. Raw honey with higher moisture content, or honey contaminated by a wet utensil during use, can degrade meaningfully. The ancient tomb honey proves that sealed, dry, dark, and completely undisturbed works remarkably well across millennia. The open jar on your counter is operating on a substantially different timeline and under substantially different conditions than a sealed Egyptian vessel. 70. Children over age 2 should drink reduced fat or skim milk because dietary fat is bad and whole milk leads to higher fat intake. This was the official recommendation in the United States for decades, applied to children with the same certainty that the adult cardiovascular guidance was applied to adults, regardless of whether the pediatric evidence base was strong enough to support it. The evidence supporting fat restriction in children is far weaker than policy suggested, and several studies have found that children consuming whole milk have lower rates of overweight compared to children drinking reduced fat milk, which is the opposite outcome the recommendation was designed to produce. Dietary fat guidelines that emerged in the 1970s through 90s for adults were extrapolated to children with limited dedicated pediatric research behind the specific application. A 2020 systematic review, published in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition, examining 28 studies, found that whole milk consumption in children was associated with lower odds of overweight or obesity compared to reduced fat milk, an association researchers attributed to greater satiety from fat-producing lower overall caloric intake. Fat is also essential for childhood neurological development. The brain is approximately 60% fat by dry weight, and adequate dietary fat during early childhood supports myelination and cognitive development. In 2019, the American Academy of Pediatrics updated guidance to acknowledge insufficient evidence for blanket fat restriction in children. Public health guidelines told parents to put developing children on a low-fat diet using adult cardiovascular evidence, then watch childhood obesity rates rise through the same era. 71. The acai bowl is photographed, filtered, posted, and consumed as the apex of health-conscious eating. It contains fruit. It arrives in a bowl. It is purchased at establishments that use the word wellness without irony, and it has all the visual language of something that is genuinely good for you on multiple levels simultaneously. Commercial acai bowls are frequently high-calorie, high-sugar meals that are nutritionally closer to dessert than to a balanced breakfast, despite the health food aesthetic that justifies both the price and the Instagram post. A standard commercial acai bowl from a health food restaurant typically contains 500 to 1,000 calories, 60 to 100 grams of sugar, and significant quantities of granola, honey, banana, and fruit toppings. A caloric and glycemic load comparable to or exceeding several breakfast items that no one would order while trying to be responsible. Acai itself is a moderately nutritious berry, high in antioxidants and containing some healthy fats and fiber. But the acai base in commercial bowls is typically a sweetened frozen blend, and the nutritional value of the berry is diluted by the surrounding construction of the dish. The granola commonly used as a topping is high in added sugar and refined oats, converting the dish from nutrient-dense fruit consumption to a high glycemic meal dressed with berries and priced like a medical intervention. The acai bowl is a smoothie and granola and honey and banana that went to aesthetics school. The health is mostly visual, and the price reflects that entirely. 72. Bromelain, the enzyme in pineapple, breaks down protein, and therefore it must break down body fat, or at least assist with digestion in some metabolically meaningful weight loss adjacent way that justifies eating pineapple as part of a fat-burning strategy rather than simply as a fruit you happen to enjoy. Bromelain digests protein, not fat, and like all enzymes ingested orally, it is largely denatured by stomach acid before reaching the small intestine, which means its systemic fat-burning properties do not exist at any stage of the digestive process. Bromelain is a proteolytic enzyme. It cleaves peptide bonds in proteins, not triglycerides, which are fats. The enzyme category responsible for breaking down dietary fat is lipase. Bromelain and lipase are different enzymes acting on different molecular substrates, and pineapple contains no meaningful lipase regardless of how much of it you consume. Enzymes are proteins, and when ingested orally, they encounter the highly acidic environment of the stomach at pH 1.5 to 3.5, which denatures most proteins including enzymes before they can perform any systemic activity. Some bromelain does survive gastric transit and reach systemic circulation, and clinically studied applications include edema reduction after surgery and sinusitis treatment, not fat metabolism. The pineapple diet for weight loss has no clinical evidence base and operates on a complete misidentification of what bromelain actually does biochemically. Pineapple is a good fruit. It is not a pharmaceutical, and the enzyme is not working on your fat. 73. Certain food combining rules insist that proteins and carbohydrates should never appear in the same meal because they require different digestive enzymes and different stomach pH levels, causing fermentation, toxin buildup, and a collection of digestive disasters that can only be avoided by eating your eggs separately from your toast and reorganizing your meals around compatibility charts no gastroenterologist has ever endorsed. Food combining rules are not supported by any peer-reviewed nutritional or gastroenterological science, and the human digestive system is specifically designed to process mixed meals containing multiple macronutrients simultaneously. It has been doing exactly this across the entirety of human evolutionary history. The food combining movement was popularized primarily by William Howard Hay in the 1920s, who proposed that proteins and starches required such different digestive conditions that consuming them together caused fermentation and autointoxication. Hay had no research support for this claim, and it has not been validated in the century since. Human gastric physiology specifically accommodates simultaneous macronutrient processing. Gastric acid, pepsin for protein digestion, and bicarbonate alkalinization for entry into the small intestine are sequenced to handle mixed loads. Pancreatic secretions into the small intestine include amylase for starch, lipase for fat, and protease for protein simultaneously. A 2000 randomized controlled trial published in the International Journal of Obesity compared a food-combining diet to a balanced diet of equivalent calories over 6 weeks. Both groups lost weight equivalently. Your digestive system evolved eating omnivorous mixed meals. It was not waiting for a 1920s physician to explain that eggs and toast are incompatible. 74. Remove the fat. Remove the calories. Remove the cardiovascular risk. Skim milk is the responsible adult version of a childhood food. The upgrade that the informed consumer makes when they start paying attention to their health and taking the dietary guidance of the latter 20th century seriously. Skim milk removes fat-soluble vitamins along with the fat, is less satiating than whole milk, and the relationship between dairy-saturated fat and cardiovascular disease is considerably more nuanced than the skim milk preference implies when examined against the actual population data. Vitamins A, D, E, and K are fat-soluble and found naturally in whole milk fat. Skim milk, having had the fat removed, loses these vitamins and must be refortified with synthetic versions, a manufacturing step that doesn't necessarily replicate the bioavailability of vitamins in their natural food matrix. Epidemiological studies have not consistently found that full-fat dairy consumption increases cardiovascular disease risk. A 2018 Lancet study across 21 countries found that higher full-fat dairy consumption was associated with lower mortality and lower cardiovascular disease risk, contradicting the skim milk orthodoxy directly. The saturated fat in dairy, including odd-chain fatty acids like pentadecanoic acid, may have different metabolic effects than saturated fats in processed foods, potentially explaining why dairy-specific studies don't consistently show the cardiovascular harm the general saturated fat hypothesis would predict. Skim milk was the product of a dietary philosophy that removed fat from everything and called it progress. The vitamins left with the fat. The satiety left with the fat. 75. The energy drink is the modern solution to fatigue. A can of functional chemistry engineered to overcome tiredness, improve performance, extend capacity, and get you through the afternoon when biology is suggesting you stop. The marketing is unambiguous about what the product delivers. The caffeine and sugar are doing the measurable work. The proprietary energy blend ingredients are largely unproven at the doses present, and the mechanism is borrowed neurological function rather than actual energy production. A standard energy drink contains 80 to 300 milligrams of caffeine, which blocks adenosine receptors in the brain. Adenosine is a neurotransmitter that promotes drowsiness. Caffeine doesn't create energy. It prevents the perception of fatigue by blocking the signal. The fatigue is still accumulating. The adenosine is still building. When the caffeine clears, the rebound fatigue is often more intense than the original tiredness because the signal that was being suppressed is now arriving with accumulated urgency. Energy drinks typically also contain significant sugar that produces a rapid blood glucose rise followed by an insulin-driven drop, the crash that users attribute to the drink wearing off. Ingredients highlighted in proprietary blends: taurine, B vitamins, ginseng, guarana, L-carnitine, are present in quantities too small to have demonstrated physiological effects in clinical studies at those doses. Excessive energy drink consumption has been associated with cardiac arrhythmias and hypertension in documented cases. The energy drink isn't giving you energy. It's borrowing against your neurological reserves at an interest rate the label doesn't disclose. 76. Any floor contact renders food biologically unacceptable and must result in immediate disposal because the floor is a contaminated surface, and anything that touches a contaminated surface is now itself contaminated and represents a health risk that no amount of personal preference for not wasting food can override. Whether food from the floor is safe to eat depends entirely on what is on the floor, not on the act of falling itself. And applying the contamination risk of a public restroom floor to the linoleum of your own recently cleaned kitchen is an extension of the logic that doesn't survive contact with basic environmental microbiology. Bacterial contamination from floor contact depends on the pathogen load of the surface, the contact time, the food's moisture content, and the specific pathogens present, if any. A dry, recently cleaned kitchen floor presents dramatically different contamination risk than a public floor in a high-traffic environment. These are not equivalent surfaces, and treating them as equivalent produces decisions calibrated to the worst-case scenario, regardless of the actual conditions. The human immune system routinely encounters and handles low-level bacterial contamination as a normal part of operating in any non-sterile environment. The food safety concern with genuinely contaminated surfaces, Salmonella, E. coli, Listeria, is real and serious in contexts where those pathogens are plausibly present. applying that concern to a clean home kitchen floor, because the category is floor is categorical thinking rather than risk assessment. Use judgment. The germ is in the details, not in the act of dropping something. 77. Celery has real chemistry in it. Apigenin and luteolin, which are flavonoids with demonstrated anti-inflammatory and antioxidant activity in laboratory studies. Meaningful fiber content at approximately 1.6 grams per 100 grams. Vitamin K, folate, vitamin C, potassium, and manganese in modest but real quantities that contribute something to the nutrient total of a varied diet. The backlash against the negative calorie myth has in some circles produced its own overcorrection. The position that celery is so nutritionally void, it isn't worth eating, that it is essentially water and crunch with no real contribution to nutrition, a food that takes up space without earning it. This is also wrong, just in the opposite direction, and worth addressing because both extremes ignore the actual, modest, real nutritional content sitting in the vegetable drawer. Celery also contains phthalides, compounds that have shown mild blood pressure lowering effects in animal studies and small human trials, though the evidence is not yet sufficient for clinical recommendations. A diet built on celery alone would be thoroughly deficient, but celery as a component of a varied diet contributes these compounds alongside the hydration and satiety benefits of its high water content. It is not a miracle food. It is not a nutritional void. It is a vegetable with real compounds in it that has been stuck between two myths, the one that made it magic and the one that made it pointless, when the truth is considerably less dramatic and considerably more useful than either. 78. Protein means meat, and the idea that a diet without animal protein is protein deficient has been so thoroughly embedded that where do you get? Your protein has become the reflexive challenge issued to anyone who mentions eating differently, delivered with the confidence of someone who has identified a genuine nutritional gap rather than repeated a cultural assumption. Multiple plant sources provide complete protein or combine easily to do so, and protein deficiency is extremely rare in anyone consuming adequate total calories regardless of whether those calories include animal products. Complete protein refers to a food containing all 9 essential amino acids in sufficient quantities. Several plant proteins are complete without any combining required. Soybeans and soy products, including tofu, tempeh, and edamame, quinoa, buckwheat, hemp seed, and amaranth are all complete plant protein sources. The concept of protein combining, that vegetarians must carefully combine complementary proteins at every meal, was popularized by Frances Moore Lappé in her 1971 book Diet for a Small Planet, and subsequently retracted by Lappé herself in a 1981 revised edition. The body maintains a pool of amino acids and does not require simultaneous complementary protein consumption at each sitting. The World Health Organization's protein requirements are easily met on plant-based diets that include adequate legumes, grains, and soy products. The question has been asked at every vegetarian dinner table for 50 years, based on a concern that was partly retracted by the person who popularized it. Plants have amino acids. The body tracks the pool all day. The steak is not the only address in the system. 79. The neon-colored bottle has become as standard as athletic footwear. Electrolytes, carbohydrates, hydration science, and sports drinks present themselves as physiologically required for anyone who exercises, because the marketing has successfully expanded the intended use case from elite endurance athletes to anyone who has ever broken a sweat within eyesight of a gym. Sports drinks were formulated for a specific context: prolonged high-intensity exercise exceeding 60 to 90 minutes, typically in heat, requiring carbohydrate replacement and electrolyte supplementation beyond what water alone provides. For the majority of exercise sessions most people complete, water is sufficient and sports drinks are unnecessary. Additional sugar consumed in the name of a performance benefit that the session did not require. The original sports drink, Gatorade, was developed in 1965 by University of Florida researchers for a football team exercising at high intensity in Florida heat for multiple hours. The formulation was designed to replace carbohydrates, sodium, and fluid lost during this specific extreme exercise context, not to hydrate a 30-minute elliptical session in an air-conditioned facility. A standard 500 milliliter sports drink contains approximately 30 to 35 grams of sugar and 270 milligrams of sodium. For a moderate gym session under an hour, this represents a caloric intake that may equal or exceed the calories burned during the session. Gatorade was built for football players in summer heat. The marketing traveled considerably further than the science did, and it brought the sugar along for the entire journey. 80. Bread is carbohydrates. Carbohydrates are the enemy, and bread makes you bloated, inflamed, and metabolically irresponsible. The war on bread has been relentless across multiple dietary movements, each finding a different reason to indict it, while the food sits there having sustained human civilization across approximately 14,000 years without being consulted about its reputation. The category called bread contains white sandwich bread, made with enriched, refined flour and traditionally fermented whole grain sourdough. And these are not the same food in any nutritionally meaningful sense. Condemning the category without distinguishing between them is nutritional shorthand that serves ideology more than it serves the person trying to make an informed choice. Whole grain bread provides dietary fiber, naturally present B vitamins, iron, magnesium, and antioxidants, and multiple large epidemiological studies associate whole grain consumption with reduced risk of cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, and colorectal cancer. The glycemic index of bread varies dramatically by type. White sandwich bread carries a GI of approximately 70 to 75. Stone ground, whole wheat bread sits at approximately 50 to 60. Traditional sourdough fermented with lactic acid bacteria reaches approximately 48 to 54, comparable to legumes. Because organic acids produced during fermentation slow starch digestion significantly, the global populations with the most studied longevity and health outcomes consume bread and grains as dietary staples. The wellness industry decided bread was toxic approximately 30 years ago. The bread has outlasted every dietary movement that condemned it, and will almost certainly outlast this one as well. 81. Ice cream is forbidden when sick. Cold, dairy, sugar, all presumed to worsen the condition, increase mucus production, and extend the illness. A prohibition delivered by parents and enforced across households with the gravity of something grounded in physiological understanding rather than transmitted cultural caution. Ice cream does not worsen cold symptoms or meaningfully increase mucus production. Cold foods can temporarily soothe inflamed throat tissue, and the dairy-mucus connection is not supported by the controlled evidence that has actually tested it. The dairy-mucus belief that milk and dairy products increase mucus production is one of the most studied food myths in respiratory medicine. A 1990 double-blind crossover study by Pinnock and colleagues gave subjects either dairy or soy milk and found no significant difference in mucus production, nasal secretion, or respiratory symptoms between the groups. A follow-up study published in the Journal of the American College of Nutrition replicated these findings. Subjects who believed dairy increased their mucus reported feeling more congested after dairy consumption, but objective measures showed no difference between dairy and non-dairy groups, placing this firmly in the category of expectation effects rather than physiology. The cold sensation of ice cream can provide genuine topical relief for inflamed throat tissue, and hospitals sometimes suggest soft cold foods for patients recovering from tonsillectomies, specifically because cold reduces local inflammation. The ice cream prohibition when sick is one of the cruelest and least evidence-based dietary restrictions in existence. The sick person should have the ice cream. It wasn't making anything worse. 82. Eliminate all dietary fat when trying to lose weight. Manage the quantity of the most calorie-dense macronutrient by eliminating it as completely as possible. Because if fat is the problem, then removing fat entirely should produce the maximum version of the desired result. This logic has been addressed from the marketing angle and the low-fat product angle, but fat elimination, specifically as a weight loss strategy, deserves its own dismantling, because the belief persists most stubbornly in this precise context, and the mechanisms by which it backfires are specific and worth understanding directly. Dietary fat stimulates the release of cholecystokinin and other satiety hormones that signal fullness to the hypothalamus. Very low-fat diets produce weaker satiety signaling, which increases hunger and drives overconsumption of carbohydrates in a cycle documented in both research literature and clinical dietary practice. Sex hormone production, testosterone, estrogen, progesterone, requires cholesterol synthesized from dietary fat. Very low-fat diets in women have been associated with menstrual irregularities, and in men with significant reductions in testosterone levels, affecting body composition outcomes through reduced muscle protein synthesis capacity. A 2018 Diet Fits randomized clinical trial published in the Journal of the American Medical Association compared healthy low-fat and healthy low-carbohydrate diets in 609 subjects over 12 months and found no significant difference in weight loss outcomes, confirming that neither approach is categorically superior. The low-fat diet replaced the mechanism that told you to stop eating with the recommendation to use willpower instead. That approach has a documented success rate, and it is not good. 83. Peanut butter occupies a special cultural category. The food that feels genuinely indulgent, but is secretly good for you. The protein source that doubles as a comfort food. The gym bag staple that has been granted nutritional credibility so firmly it rarely gets examined with the same scrutiny applied to other foods sharing its caloric and sugar profile. Natural peanut butter made from ground peanuts is a nutritionally reasonable food. Commercial peanut butter, with added sugar, hydrogenated vegetable oils, and elevated salt, is a different product wearing the same name and the same health reputation. And the distinction matters when the health case is being made for the category as though both versions are equivalent. Natural peanut butter, ingredients, peanuts, optionally salt, provides healthy monounsaturated fats, approximately 7 to 8 grams of protein per 2 tablespoon serving, magnesium, vitamin E, and niacin. These are genuine nutritional contributions. Dominant commercial brands contain added sugar of 1 to 3 grams per serving, partially hydrogenated vegetable oils added to prevent separation, and significantly more sodium than natural varieties. Added hydrogenated oils may still contain trace trans fats below the 0.5 gram per serving threshold required for label disclosure, meaning the label can legally read 0 trans fat while the product contains some. The protein-to-calorie ratio is also not especially high. 2 tablespoons provides 7 to 8 grams of protein, alongside approximately 190 calories, making peanut butter primarily a fat food with a moderate protein contribution. Read the ingredient list. If it has more than 2 items, the health story gets more complicated than the label's reputation suggests. 84. Calcium supplements for bone health have been marketed with the straightforwardness of basic arithmetic. Bones need calcium. Supplements provide calcium. The problem of bone density is therefore addressable by purchasing the right product and taking it consistently. Millions of people take them daily for this reason, and the recommendation has been delivered by healthcare providers with enough frequency to feel like settled clinical practice. Calcium supplementation has failed to consistently demonstrate fracture risk reduction in clinical trials, and high-dose calcium supplements have been associated with increased cardiovascular risk and kidney stone formation. Risks that substantially shift the risk-benefit calculation for a supplement taken primarily for preventive purposes. A 2012 meta-analysis in the British Medical Journal, examining data from multiple randomized controlled trials, found that calcium supplementation was associated with a 30% increased risk of myocardial infarction. The proposed mechanism involves rapid elevation of serum calcium following supplementation, which may promote arterial calcification and platelet aggregation. A Cochrane review of calcium supplementation and fracture prevention found limited and inconsistent evidence that calcium supplements alone reduce fracture risk in community-dwelling adults. Calcium from dietary sources does not appear to carry the same cardiovascular risk. The absorption rate, distribution, and cofactors present in whole food appear to matter in ways the supplement cannot replicate. Bone health requires calcium, vitamin D for absorption, vitamin K2 to direct calcium to bone rather than soft tissue, weight-bearing exercise, and adequate protein. The calcium arrived from the supplement. It didn't always go where it was needed. Some of it ended up in arterial tissue, which was not the goal. 85. Olive oil is the operative ingredient of the Mediterranean diet. Extract it, bottle it, pour it over your otherwise unchanged dietary pattern, and import the health outcomes of a population whose relationship with food, work, community, and daily life you have not otherwise replicated. The Mediterranean diet is a dietary pattern, a constellation of foods, behaviors, and lifestyle factors studied as a system, and identifying any single ingredient as the operative mechanism is a reductive exercise that serves olive oil marketing more faithfully than it serves the evidence. The Predimed Trial, a large Spanish randomized controlled trial published in the New England Journal of Medicine, found that a Mediterranean diet supplemented with extra virgin olive oil or mixed nuts reduced cardiovascular events by approximately 30% compared to a low-fat controlled diet. A landmark finding that tested the full dietary pattern supplemented with these foods, not olive oil in isolation. The Mediterranean diet, as studied, includes high vegetable and legume consumption, fish 2 or more times weekly, whole grains, moderate wine with meals, limited red and processed meat, and traditional cooking practices, including extended meal times and social eating. An ecosystem of behaviors that cannot be disaggregated and poured into a bottle. Populations with the best health outcomes in Mediterranean regions also benefit from higher physical activity, stronger social cohesion, lower chronic stress, and more traditional food supplies than comparison populations. Olive oil is genuinely beneficial, high in monounsaturated fatty acids with anti-inflammatory properties. It is one instrument in an orchestra. Buying just the olive oil does not give you the symphony. The other instruments were doing considerable work, and they were not available at the specialty food market. 86. The relationship between eating speed and satiety signaling is real. The gut releases hormones including cholecystokinin, GLP-1, and peptide YY in response to food presence. And these signals take approximately 15 to 20 minutes to reach the hypothalamus, meaning eating very rapidly can allow caloric overconsumption before the body's own feedback system catches up. The claim that eating speed independently causes weight gain, however, oversimplifies what the research actually shows. And the distinction between a contributing behavioral factor and an independent cause matters when you're trying to understand what's actually driving an outcome. Studies have found correlations between faster self-reported eating speed and higher BMI, but these are observational associations. Fast eating may be a marker of other behaviors, including stress, distraction, food insecurity history, and eating environment rather than an independent causal mechanism. A 2018 study published in BMJ Open found that slower eating was associated with lower BMI across a large Japanese cohort. But this is correlation data rather than a controlled experiment demonstrating that slowing down alone produces weight loss as an isolated intervention. Mindful eating practices, including slower eating, reduced screen distraction, and attention to hunger and satiety cues, have shown positive outcomes in behavioral weight management trials, but isolating eating speed as the specific operative variable from the cluster of mindfulness behaviors being studied simultaneously is methodologically difficult. Fast eating is often a symptom of a stressed, distracted food relationship. Treating the speed as the cause while ignoring everything producing it is incomplete by about half the conversation. 87. Sugar is poison. All sugar. Every form, including the sugar in fruit and vegetables and whole foods. And the modern sugar panic has produced a category prohibition so broad it includes nutrients your body genuinely requires to function, and foods with documented health benefits that have been consumed by long-lived populations across centuries without producing the outcomes the blanket prohibition predicts. The relevant variable is not the presence of sugar, but its delivery matrix, fiber, water content, associated micronutrients, and the speed of absorption. And whole food sugars and isolated added sugars are genuinely different in their metabolic behavior, in ways that make lumping them together scientifically indefensible. The sugar in a whole apple arrives, packaged with approximately 4.4 grams of fiber, polyphenols, including quercetin and chlorogenic acid, and significant water content. This matrix slows sugar absorption, attenuates blood glucose response, provides satiety, and delivers bioactive compounds. The glycemic index of a whole apple is approximately 36, classified as low. Apple juice with the fiber removed produces a substantially higher and faster glycemic response and provides a fraction of the polyphenol content of the whole fruit. The World Health Organization's sugar guidelines specifically target free sugars, those added to foods by manufacturers or cooks, plus sugars in honey, syrups, and fruit juices, and do not recommend limiting sugar from intact whole fruits and vegetables. Eat the apple. Fear the soda. The package the sugar arrives in is doing most of the work that matters. 88. Properly frozen meat is microbiologically safer than fresh meat that has been in transit and retail storage for several days, because freezing halts bacterial multiplication entirely while refrigeration only slows it, and the gap between those two outcomes over multiple days is not trivial from a food safety standpoint. Fresh meat sold in supermarkets has often traveled from processing facility to distribution center to retail display over multiple days, meaning the consumer receives meat that is already several days old and has been undergoing slow, continued bacterial growth throughout its refrigerated journey. Freezing halts bacterial multiplication entirely. Bacteria present in meat at the time of freezing remain present, but do not grow, replicate, or produce additional toxins during frozen storage. The USDA's Food Safety and Inspection Service states that frozen meat is safe to eat indefinitely from a food safety standpoint, with quality in terms of texture, flavor, and moisture degrading over time due to ice crystal formation and freezer burn, while safety itself does not deteriorate. The practice of thawing and refreezing, which does negatively affect texture and creates some additional bacterial growth opportunity during the thaw period, is sometimes confused with the frozen state itself being unsafe, producing a generalized suspicion of frozen meat that the actual food science does not support. Fresh meat at a supermarket is meat that has been aging in controlled conditions for several days before reaching you. The frozen meat stopped the clock at the freezer. The safety argument for preferring fresh over frozen is exactly backwards. Fresh is more time elapsed. Frozen is more time stopped. 89. Eat a rainbow of foods every day. Every color, every day, red, orange, yellow, green, blue, purple. Cover the spectrum and you've covered your nutritional bases. A framework so visually intuitive and easy to communicate that it became nutritional shorthand delivered to children and adults alike, with the implied promise that color variety and dietary adequacy are the same thing. The rainbow framework is directionally useful and not wrong in its intent. Different plant pigments correlate with different phytonutrient profiles, and getting varied plant food colors does contribute to dietary variety in a genuinely meaningful way. The problem is that it's an oversimplification that can be gamed, misunderstood, and followed with apparent precision while still producing a nutritionally poor diet when the spirit of the principle gets separated from the letter of it. The rule is gameable in ways that undermine its intent. Red-dyed candy and red bell peppers are not the same red. Yellow corn chips and yellow squash are not interchangeable rainbow entries. A child instructed to eat the rainbow can satisfy the visual requirement with artificially colored candy and technically complete the assignment. Nutritional adequacy requires attention to macronutrients, fiber, fat quality, protein completeness, and specific micronutrients including B12, vitamin D, iron, and iodine that cannot be assessed by color alone. The framework also implicitly sidelines important colorless foods. Cauliflower, garlic, onions, and white beans contain sulfur compounds, prebiotic fiber, and flavonoids that the color system ignores entirely. Eat the rainbow. Just don't mistake the mnemonic for the complete system. 90. Reheated chicken will make you sick. The warning circulates with the authority of established food safety doctrine. Delivered as though the act of reheating itself introduces a danger that wasn't present in the original cooking, as though the microwave is doing something to previously safe food that transforms it into a health risk. Reheated chicken is safe when it has been stored correctly and reheated to the appropriate internal temperature. The danger is improper storage between initial cooking and reheating, not reheating as a mechanical act. The genuine food safety concern with chicken involves bacterial contamination, primarily Salmonella and Campylobacter, which are killed by reaching an internal temperature of 74 degrees Celsius during both initial cooking and reheating. Chicken stored in the refrigerator at proper temperatures below 4 degrees Celsius within 2 hours of cooking remains safe for 3 to 4 days and can be safely reheated without introducing new risk. A specific but real concern applies to chicken stored at room temperature for extended periods before refrigeration, which allows rapid bacterial multiplication. Reheating chicken that has been improperly stored does not eliminate all safety risks because some bacterial toxins, particularly from Staphylococcus aureus, are heat stable. They survive reheating even when the bacteria producing them are killed. This toxin concern applies to any improperly stored protein food, not specifically to chicken. The chicken is not the problem. The 2 hours it spent on the counter before refrigeration is the problem. Reheating surfaces the consequences of what happened in the storage window, not during the reheating itself. 91. Nuts are high in fat. Fat is calorie dense. Eating calorie dense foods causes weight gain, and therefore, nuts should be limited or avoided when managing weight because the arithmetic of their caloric content seems to make the outcome inevitable. Despite being calorically dense, regular nut consumption is consistently associated with healthy body weight in epidemiological studies, and controlled feeding trials have found that nut eaters don't gain the weight their caloric intake would predict. A pattern so consistent across studies, it has become a recognized puzzle in nutritional research, rather than a finding that has been quietly set aside. The paradox involves incomplete energy absorption. The rigid cell walls of nuts are incompletely broken down by human digestive enzymes, meaning a meaningful fraction of nut fat passes through the gut unabsorbed. Studies using fecal fat measurement and direct calorie absorption methods have found that almonds deliver approximately 20% fewer absorbable calories than their label indicates. Nuts also carry high satiety value due to their fat, protein, and fiber combination. Studies have found compensatory reductions in caloric intake from other foods following nut consumption, suggesting nuts displace rather than simply add to total caloric intake in many individuals. The Nurses' Health Study found that frequent nut consumption was associated with lower body weight and lower risk of weight gain over time compared to nut abstainers. Regular nut consumption has also been associated with improved lipid profiles and reduced cardiovascular risk. The studies kept finding people who ate nuts were healthier and leaner, which is the opposite of what fat avoidance logic predicted, and eventually the consistency of the evidence became impossible to explain away. 92. Cooking destroys garlic's health properties, the allicin, the sulfur compounds, the anti-everything biological activity, and raw garlic is therefore the only form worth consuming for its documented benefits, with any application of heat representing a nutritional compromise that leaves you with a pleasant flavor and a fraction of the original therapeutic potential. The truth is more nuanced and considerably more actionable. Garlic contains multiple sulfur compounds with overlapping activity. Specific preparation methods can preserve significant biological activity, even after cooking, and the step that matters most happens before the heat is applied. Allicin is produced when garlic is crushed or chopped. The enzyme allinase converts allin into allicin through a reaction that occurs at the site of cellular damage. Allicin itself is heat sensitive and begins degrading at approximately 60 degrees Celsius. However, if garlic is crushed or chopped and left to rest for 10 to 15 minutes before heat is applied, the allicin conversion reaction completes before cooking begins. The allicin then transforms during cooking into other organosulfur compounds, including ajoine, diallyl disulfide, and diallyl trisulfide, which retain significant anti-inflammatory and cardiovascular protective properties. Whole uncut garlic cloves roasted without prior crushing produce dramatically less active compound conversion than crushed then rested garlic, confirming that the knife and the clock matter more than the temperature. Crush the garlic, wait 10 minutes, then cook it. You've preserved most of the relevant chemistry through a preparation sequence that the raw-only position never mentions, because it would make the rule too complicated to function as a rule. 93. Grapefruit accelerates fat burning through its enzyme content, and eating half a grapefruit before every meal triggers fat metabolism pathways that caloric restriction alone cannot access. The grapefruit diet has existed in various forms since at least the 1930s, and the fat-burning enzyme claim has been the core of its proposition across every iteration without ever being identified, isolated, or named. Grapefruit does not burn fat or trigger fat metabolism enzymes. The modest associations between grapefruit consumption and weight loss in limited studies are more plausibly explained by appetite suppression, water content, and caloric replacement than by any special chemistry the fruit performs on stored adipose tissue. The 1930s Hollywood diet claimed grapefruit contained a fat-burning enzyme. No such enzyme has ever been identified or isolated in grapefruit, and the claim has no biochemical basis beyond the confidence with which it was originally asserted. A 2006 study published in the Journal of Medicinal Food found that subjects who consumed half a grapefruit or grapefruit juice before meals lost more weight over 12 weeks than control groups, but researchers acknowledged the mechanisms were unconfirmed and the study was small. More plausible explanations include grapefruit's high water and fiber content producing pre-meal satiety, its low caloric density of approximately 52 calories per half, and the replacement of higher calorie foods before meals. Grapefruit does contain compounds that inhibit cytochrome P453A4, an enzyme responsible for metabolizing many prescription drugs including statins and calcium channel blockers, a drug interaction that is real, clinically significant, and worth knowing about. It doesn't burn your fat. It fills you up because it's mostly water, with almost no calories, and that's already a reasonable thing for a food to do. 94. Microwaved food loses all its nutritional value. The radiation destroys the vitamins. The process strips the minerals, and what comes out of the microwave is a nutritionally depleted version of what went in, convenient but compromised, a trade-off you make when speed matters more than nourishment. This was addressed from the general destruction angle earlier, but the all-nutritional value version of the claim is extreme enough to warrant specific data that goes further than the general principle. Glucosinolates in cruciferous vegetables, compounds with documented cancer-preventive potential in laboratory research, are significantly better preserved in microwaved broccoli than in boiled broccoli. A 2009 study found that boiling broccoli resulted in 77% loss of glucosinolates, while microwaving resulted in only 8% loss. A difference of nearly 10 to 1 in favor of the appliance that's been accused of destroying everything. Vitamin C retention in microwaved vegetables is typically higher than in boiled vegetables, because vitamin C is water-soluble and leaches into cooking water during boiling. Leaving the vegetable and entering the water, you subsequently pour down the drain. Research published in the Journal of Agricultural and Food Chemistry found that microwaving was the preferred cooking method for preserving antioxidant content across a range of vegetables compared to boiling, pressure cooking, or frying. The microwave has been convicted of nutritional destruction in the court of popular opinion without a single piece of supporting evidence, while the actual data shows it's among the best methods for preserving the compounds people are eating vegetables specifically to obtain. The boiling water is where the vitamins went. 95. Caffeine causes anxiety, and anxious people should eliminate caffeine entirely. The connection feels physiologically obvious, because caffeine increases heart rate, increases alertness, and can produce jitteriness that resembles anxiety symptoms closely enough that the association seems self-evident to anyone who has experienced both. The relationship between caffeine and anxiety is real, but it is highly individual, dose-dependent, and shaped by genetic variation in caffeine metabolism that makes blanket elimination a crude tool for a problem that responds better to personalization. Caffeine blocks adenosine receptors and increases release of norepinephrine and dopamine, mechanisms that can increase physiological arousal states overlapping with anxiety symptoms. In anxiety-prone individuals, caffeine can amplify panic responses through anxiety sensitivity, making the concern legitimate for a specific subgroup. However, caffeine metabolism varies approximately 40-fold between individuals based on CYP1A2 enzyme genetic variants. Fast metabolizers clear caffeine quickly and experience fewer sustained effects. Slow metabolizers experience prolonged, elevated plasma caffeine levels and are more susceptible to anxiety-producing effects. Moderate caffeine consumption of 100 to 200 milligrams, roughly 1 to 2 cups of coffee, has been associated in multiple studies with improved mood, reduced depressive symptoms, and better cognitive performance, outcomes relevant to overall well-being in people managing anxiety disorders. Abrupt caffeine cessation in regular users also causes withdrawal symptoms, including headache, irritability, fatigue, and difficulty concentrating for 1 to 5 days. Outcomes poorly compatible with anxiety management. Stop all caffeine is the recommendation that treats the most variable and dose-dependent stimulant in common use, as though everyone metabolizes it identically. The conversation should be about dose and individual response, not a blanket prohibition issued without genetic testing. 96. Fermented is probiotic. Probiotic means gut health, and therefore all fermented foods improve your gut microbiome. Kombucha, kimchi, sauerkraut, sourdough. The entire fermented category has become synonymous with digestive virtue in wellness culture, the category label doing nutritional work that requires considerably more specificity to actually earn. Fermentation is a process, not a guarantee of live probiotic delivery, and many commercial fermented products are heat-treated after fermentation, killing the live cultures that would confer probiotic benefits if they arrived intact. Sourdough bread, despite being produced through microbial fermentation, contains no live bacteria at consumption. The baking process at temperatures exceeding 90 degrees Celsius kills all microorganisms. Sourdough has other genuine benefits, including lower glycemic index, different gluten structure, and organic acid content, but it is not a probiotic delivery vehicle by any honest accounting. Many commercial kombuchas, krauts, and pickles sold in shelf-stable, non-refrigerated form have been pasteurized after fermentation to extend shelf life, killing the live cultures in the process. The fermentation happened. The probiotics did not survive to reach you. Probiotic research is also highly strain-specific. The clinical evidence for probiotic benefits in specific conditions like antibiotic-associated diarrhea relates to specific bacterial strains at specific doses, not to fermented food as a category. Even live culture fermented foods contain variable bacterial quantities and species depending on production method, storage, and product age, with dose and species rarely characterized on commercial labels. Fermented means bacteria were involved in making it. It does not mean living bacteria survived, cleared your stomach acid, and are doing clinically meaningful work in your colon. Check for the refrigerator case and read for live and active cultures. The rest is ambiance. 97. Iron deficiency means eat more red meat. The prescription is intuitive, common, and delivered by well-meaning people who have identified a real nutritional need and matched it to the most culturally available answer without necessarily completing the conversation about the other half of the iron story, which is that the source of iron matters considerably less than what you eat alongside it. Red meat does contain highly bioavailable heme iron, and this is a genuine nutritional advantage. It is not uniquely the best source of iron in the food supply, and the source of iron interacts with surrounding dietary context in ways that can dramatically change the net iron actually delivered to your system. Heme iron from animal products has an absorption rate of approximately 15 to 35%. Non-heme iron from plant sources has an absorption rate of approximately 2 to 20%. But this rate is highly modifiable by what else is consumed at the same meal. Vitamin C consumed simultaneously with non-heme iron can increase its absorption by up to 6-fold by reducing ferric iron to the more absorbable ferrous form. High iron plant sources include white beans at approximately 8 milligrams per cup, lentils at approximately 6.6 milligrams per cup, tofu at approximately 3 milligrams per 100 grams, and pumpkin seeds at approximately 8.5 milligrams per 100 grams, quantities comparing favorably with beef at approximately 2.5 milligrams per 100 grams. Conversely, calcium inhibits non-heme iron absorption, and tannins in tea and coffee reduce it. The prescription eat more red meat for iron is incomplete by about half a nutrition conversation. What you eat with your iron source determines more of the outcome than the source alone. 98. After a period of overindulgent eating, a juice cleanse provides a digestive reset, a break from solid food that allows the gut to recover, repair, and recalibrate before returning to normal eating, the gastrointestinal equivalent of turning the system off and back on again, with the expectation that it will perform better having had the pause. The digestive system does not require a reset and is not improved by liquid-only nutrition. The colon's bacterial ecosystem is not refreshed by juice. It is depleted of the fiber it requires to sustain the microbial community that constitutes its functional health, which is the opposite of what the cleanse is advertising. The gut microbiome, the community of approximately 38 trillion bacteria residing primarily in the large intestine, requires dietary fiber as its primary substrate. These bacteria ferment fiber into short-chain fatty acids, including butyrate, propionate, and acetate, which feed colonocytes, regulate immune function, and maintain mucosal barrier integrity. Juice cleanses provide almost no fiber because juice extraction removes the fiber-containing pulp. Multiple days of very low fiber intake depletes the gut microbiome substrate, reducing microbial diversity and short-chain fatty acid production, the opposite of a gut health intervention by any meaningful definition. There is no clinical evidence that the gastrointestinal tract requires periodic rest from solid food in healthy individuals. The weight loss associated with juice cleanses is primarily attributable to caloric restriction and substantial water and glycogen loss. Typically, 1 to 3 kilograms of glycogen-associated water released when carbohydrate stores deplete. This weight returns within days of resuming normal eating. You are not resetting your digestive system. You are removing its food supply for 3 days and calling the resulting scale movement progress. 99. The word natural on packaging is a shorthand for safety, purity, and health. It means the food came from nature, was not heavily processed, and represents a better choice than its conventional or artificial alternatives, which is the entire job the word is doing on the label and the entire job it is not actually qualified to perform. Natural has no legally binding definition in most countries and no nutritional standards attached to it, which means it can legally appear on products containing high fructose corn syrup, significant sodium, and industrial processing provided those ingredients originated from a natural source at some point in their production. The FDA has historically operated without a formal definition for natural on food labeling. In 2015, the FDA invited public comment on whether to define the term, received over 7,500 comments, and has not established a binding regulatory definition, meaning manufacturers self-determine its application according to whatever interpretation serves their product most favorably. The Federal Trade Commission uses a standard that essentially requires only that no artificial ingredients or added colors are present, a standard accommodating foods with significant processing, added sugars, and elevated sodium. Arsenic is natural. Botulinum toxin is natural. Mercury is natural. The argument that natural origin implies safety or health value is a logical fallacy explicitly taught in critical thinking curricula and explicitly exploited in food marketing simultaneously, often by the same cultural institutions within a short distance of each other. A 2015 Consumer Reports survey found that 73% of Americans look for natural on food labels, and that most assumed it meant no artificial ingredients, no pesticides, and no GMOs, none of which the natural label legally guarantees. The label tells you what the manufacturer decided the word would communicate. The ingredient list tells you what's actually inside. 100, the most nutritionally dense foods in existence include dried legumes, oats, eggs, frozen vegetables, canned fish, cabbage, carrots, and bananas. Foods that are among the cheapest available in most food-secure environments and that appear in every serious evidence-based nutritional recommendation across every dietary framework that has taken cost and accessibility into account. The claim that healthy eating is too expensive for most people is true for the premium version of healthy eating and substantially overstated for the basic version. And the confusion between those two versions has produced a narrative that removes personal agency from people who actually have more options than they've been led to believe. A cup of cooked lentils costs approximately 15 to 30 cents in most markets and delivers approximately 18 grams of protein, 16 grams of fiber, substantial folate, iron, and potassium. A 2013 USDA Economic Research Service report comparing food cost by nutrient density found that many of the most nutrient-dense foods, legumes, eggs, canned fish, root vegetables, whole grains, were among the most affordable across all cost metrics examined. The cost barriers to healthy eating are real in specific contexts: food deserts where fresh produce is physically unavailable, time poverty that makes preparation of whole foods impractical, and the caloric efficiency of ultra-processed foods in extreme scarcity. These are genuine structural problems that deserve serious attention. The myth is also partially constructed by comparing grocery store produce to farmers market premium offerings and specialty health food stores, then declaring the entire category unaffordable based on the most expensive version of it. The category is enormous. The price range within it spans from nearly free to genuinely inaccessible, and the narrative has been built disproportionately around the expensive end. 101. Keto, paleo, vegan, carnivore, Mediterranean, Whole30. One of these is correct. Someone has figured out the optimal human eating system, and your task is to find the right one and commit to it completely. Because the search for the one true diet is the central organizing project of modern nutrition culture and the framework around which an enormous industry has been constructed. The scientific consensus from dietary research across decades is not that a specific named diet system is optimal for human health, but that a small set of consistent principles, applicable across wildly different food cultures and dietary patterns, determine outcomes, and the named systems are frameworks for reaching these principles rather than the principles themselves. The longest-lived, healthiest population studied: Okinawan Japanese, Sardinian Italians, Nicoya Costa Ricans, Seventh-day Adventist communities in Loma Linda, California, and Greek island populations. Eat dramatically different specific foods, but share consistent patterns. High plant food intake, low ultra-processed food consumption, moderate caloric intake, social eating, and physical activity integrated into daily life. No single named diet system has been shown in rigorous large-scale controlled trials to be demonstrably superior to other whole food-based dietary patterns for long-term health outcomes. The Diet Fits trial comparison of low-fat and low-carbohydrate diets showed equivalent outcomes. The most consistent predictors of poor dietary health across populations are the degree of ultra-processed food consumption and the insufficiency of vegetable and fiber intake, variables addressable within almost any named framework. Adherence is the most powerful determinant of dietary outcome in real-world conditions. The best diet system is the one a specific individual will actually sustain. 101 myths. Pick the one you still believe. Drop it in the comments with your evidence, because that's the only myth in this video that actually matters. If you want to see more, click the video on screen now.